distorting, really good point, because that's been sort of almost weaponised by some people.
We spoke to the great-grandson of one of the survivors of Auschwitz, Lily Ebbett, and it's just incredibly moving. And we think what people went through, and it's how many people are denying now that it ever even happened.
Oh, I mean, that's back as well, isn't it? Thanks to social media, I suppose, the denial side of it.
Yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary, isn't
and
it?
then when you begin to read just one story, you just think, my goodness.
Absolutely. Look, it's going to be an amazing show. I see you're going to be covering Holocaust Memorial Day and those events today. Big thank you to Sam Armstrong for joining me. Thank you so much for your listening and indeed for your calls as well. Ian Collins up next. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer and this is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Thank you to Julia. 3 minutes after 1 o'clock, right here on the home of common sense. You're very welcome. A plethora of savoury delights awaits. Lots of debating material here. We'll talk Donald Trump, expected to visit the UK, quote, soon, after holding that first call with Prime Minister Keir Starmer since his inauguration. Apparently, it was 45 minutes worth of phone call. Wow. This comes as new polling reveals, as you've been hearing, that British voters actually back many of Donald Trump's policies. What a surprise. We'll have more on that in a couple of moments. Also this afternoon, King Charles will become the first head of state to visit Auschwitz after touring the former Nazi concentration camp to mark the 80th anniversary of its liberation. We'll talk to the relative of one Holocaust survivor later in the programme. And 4 million people face council tax hikes of up to 5 times the legal limit from April as bankrupt councils, how are they all so darn skint, exploit loopholes to try to balance their books. I don't mind a hike in council tax as long as you're going to provide the equivalence in services. That's the kind of missing part of the jigsaw on all of this. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news, right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Talk me through this. Donald Trump. I mean, there's a lot to talk about with Donald Trump. I'm going to ask this question in just a very straightforward way, and I want you to think about it. There's an instinctive answer, and then there's a more thoughtful answer. So think about the backstory to your own opinion on this. Why do you like Donald Trump? What is it about Donald Trump? Why do you like Donald Trump? Most sane people, I think, would acknowledge in any other world, this is not a man you would necessarily trust. You wouldn't lend him a tenner and expect it back. Oh, I'll give it to you next week. You could almost hear it. You wouldn't go into business with him because you kind of say, oh, yeah, we went bankrupt. Don't worry. But you did all right. Yeah, well, I did all right. But, you know, it was beyond my control. The accountants just did it this way. You wouldn't leave your eldest daughter alone in the same room, maybe. You wouldn't put him down as a reliable witness in a court case. There's all of those things. But people love him. I sense this side of the pond, there is a disproportionate, almost love affair with Donald Trump. Now, the general rule of thumb, and I will always maintain this, I will educate my kids this way, is not to trust, really, any politician. The old adage that the fact that somebody wants to be one of the most powerful people on the planet should be enough to preclude them from even standing. That quote is attributed to many people, I think Billy Connolly being one of them. But that is true. I mean, the idea that you desire to be the Prime Minister or the President in this case, straight away you go, right, OK, what's going on there? That's a certain type of psychology to want to take that gig. And half of me wants to congratulate and envy somebody with that level of unbridled confidence. And there's another big chunk of me that thinks you must have so much of an inflated opinion of your own abilities. And we've seen that many, many times, right? But Donald, what is it about Donald Trump in particular? British voters actually back many of his policies. They looked at around about 2,000 people when they were looking into this. And when it came to things like his views on DEI and other areas of diversity, the environment and gender and issues, as we saw this weekend, US's frontier with Mexico, the border emergency team going in there. And then Colombia, what happened? And Colombia was just a stroke of absolute, well, I don't want to say genius, because it shouldn't be genius. It's only genius when set against the ineptitude and the shortcomings of our and other Western governments. It should be just logical. OK, here's 2 plane loads of very bad people. We've got the drug dealers on here. We've got the violent thugs. We've got the rapists. We're deporting them back to where they came from. In this case, it's Colombia. So we're going to send the very bad people, not the good people, the bad people, back to Colombia, because that is their place of birth. So that's all very reasonable stuff, right? Let's get them back to the place that they were born, where they originate from. We're sending them back. And then Colombia go, no, you can't do that. You can't be sending bad people back here. Your people. No. And so Trump said, OK, we'll whack a bunch of tariffs on you then. See how you like it. Within about half an hour, they rolled over and went, fine, land the plane. Here's the runway. Now, it's that, isn't it? That is a good example of it. I'm not absolutely sure that all of Trump's tenure in the White House is going to end up quite necessarily as straightforward as that. I don't blame him. Any other leader would suffer, the same hurdles and bumps and potential hoops you've got to jump through. I think certainly on liquefied natural gas is going to be a big potential problem. There's a huge possibility of a backlash from voters on that. This is him unleashing American energy. He has essentially jumped all over Joe Biden, who'd previously said, no, we're not going that way. We've got some green energy spending. He's completely put that in the shredder, and he's announced plans to go back to what Texas does best, oil and gas. Now, if they concentrate on being, in his words, a global leader of exporting their energy, the downside of that, I mean, speak to an economist how this all works, is it could well mean that American energy, that energy domestically in America becomes more expensive. Now, America is already the largest producer of liquefied natural gas, but that could put them in a price war, which inflates the price. So there'll be things like that. Deportations, some of it can work. I'm not absolutely sure all of it is going to work. We've already seen that the birthright issue has been challenged by the courts almost on day one. But that doesn't mean that's Trump's fault. He's got an idea and somebody else has an idea to oppose it. But when you look at everything considered, what is it about Trump? Why do you like Donald Trump? If you were one of those people that was surveyed, hypothetically, why would you be ticking the box that, yeah, I like this guy? What is it about this guy? I'm always reminded of the American author and former civil rights protester Maya Angelou, who said this, and I think this is so telling, it's telling in my field of work as well. She said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Now, this is, of course, a great thing if you are, I don't know, the advocate of benevolence and charity worker, someone who only does very nice, fluffy things in life. People remember how you made them feel. That's it doesn't matter about, they can't quote the words you said, but they know you made them feel good. But when it comes to politicians, the idea that it's how it makes you feel is dangerous. Like when people argue emotionally rather than pragmatically. It's a real danger zone to invoke emotions into this. So many policies are about an emotion rather than an intelligent thought process. Emotionally, this person makes me feel good. Could be on the left, could be on the right, doesn't matter. It's not specific on Trump, this. But I do think he's got that in bucket loads. He sets the mood music. He says it in a certain way. How you say something, not just how you make them feel, how you say something, absolutely crucial. The sort of casual, saying controversial things in a casual manner is always a unique art. And he has it in bucket loads. 0344 499 1000. Forget the detail, just concentrate on how you feel. This guy's making me feel good. He's really good. So why do you like Donald Trump? A genuine answer. Because I can absolutely see all of the attractions around Trump, and I can see why there is an appetite to look at our leaders, particularly our current leader, and go, you see what Trump's just done there? Can you do that, Keir? See that? Can you do that, please? Because it works, it's logical, it makes sense. 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this story and a few of the other big stories of the day as well. Robert Taylor is back with us, the political commentator and journalist. Robert, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
We've talked about Trump a lot over the last couple of years. He's not everybody's cup of tea, but you have to recognise, where there is a talent. I mean, acknowledge the talent, and clearly he's not exactly bereft of talent.
No, and a lot of what he said in his inauguration speech last week, I can imagine people in this country cheering along to. We've had enough of diversity and inclusion. We've had enough of judging people on the colour of their skin. Frankly, we were brought up, I was certainly brought up just to be colourblind, ignore it, and just promote people on merit, give people jobs on merit.
Sure.
That's the way we were all brought up. That was common sense 20 years ago. And we've all gone against that in the last sort of decade. And it's so refreshing to see that sort of thing. It's very refreshing to see the way he's dealing with illegal immigrants to the US. I think we should be trying to do more of that here. Of course, some of the stuff he does worries me. I mean, I think the Greenland business, sort of bullying Denmark, is pretty appalling. I don't like the idea of giving Putin a way out at all. And I fear that that may happen. But an awful lot of what Donald Trump said last week is just pure common sense. And you're absolutely right. We need some of that here as well.
Yeah, and this comes on the back of that big phone call that him and Starmer had together, a 45-minute chat. I don't know, chatting to Keir Starmer for 45 minutes. I might run out of things to say after about 45 seconds maybe, but it was a big phone call. It wasn't recorded, interestingly, but we were wondering whether it might have sounded, Robert, a bit like this.
Hello. Please hold for the President of the United States. Please hold for the President of the United States.
Hello, is this Tutir Kier?
Hey!
Don here. I'm hearing rumors that you're locking people up for posting memes.
Yes, but because they are far-right thugs saying hurty words and upsetting you.
Listen, I'm going to stick my foot far right up your
You can't do that to me. My dad was a tool maker.
Well, he certainly made a tool for the World Economic Forum.
Don't you bring Davos into this. I'll tell my mummy.
Yes, well, my mom, who was probably the greatest mom there ever has been, came from Scotland. She always told me, Donnie, don't ever let those commie take over the home country.
See, that's how I wonder if it went, Robert. What a nice thought.
Well, wouldn't that have been great? That's a wonderful sketch, by the way. Look, I mean, the first thing to say, it's really good news that I think Starmer was the first European leader, which just goes to show that the special relationship, if we can still call it that, is still worth something. And if we can get a state visit, then fantastic. That's all good. But it must have been profoundly awkward, given what Labour tried to, send people over to get the Democrats elected. David Lammy has said that Trump is a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath. Starmer himself, of course, loves the EU and formerly wanted to get rid of the monarchy. He's flip-flopped on that now. Trump is the reverse. He hates the EU and loves the monarchy. So there's not much in common between Trump and Starmer. I guess it was a case of diplomacy on that phone call for 45 minutes.
It's interesting. We're asking the question, why do you like Donald Trump? What is it about Donald Trump? I mean, you can wear kind of two hats on this. You can say, do you know what? I don't like this man. I don't really try on a personal level. I wouldn't trust it. As I said at the beginning, not absolutely sure I could go into business with him. He might be the guy that I'd check the bank account and realise there's nothing in there anymore. There'd be a sort of almost Del Boy-like reason why. Oh, no, don't worry, the money's coming. I've been made promises. You can almost see that happening. But simultaneously, you cannot. I don't want to like or love politicians, but you can still kind of somehow admire and respect what they are doing. And I think Trump's found himself in that place.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, he's a bit of a bully, quite a bit of a bully, quite frankly, Trump. He's determined to get his own way, and he does. And, he's the kind of guy you want to have on your side. But I think the important thing here is he speaks a lot of common sense. And the poll that was conducted about what British people think of Trump, apparently they said, look, here are some ideas. Do you agree with them? They didn't say to these people it was Donald Trump's ideas. They just said, here are some ideas. Do you agree with them?
Yeah.
And if you take Donald Trump out of the equation, people say, yeah, I really like that. So, that says its own lesson as well.
Let's move on to this story, Robert. Around 50 survivors of Auschwitz have returned there today to mark 27th of January 1945 liberation. Elie Wiesel was deported to the camp at the age of 15, became a leading Holocaust spokesperson. Here's what he said when accepting the Nobel Peace Prize. This is back in 1986.
It all happened so fast. The ghetto, the decrees, the persecutions, the deportation, the sealed cattle car, the fiery altar upon which the history of my people and the future of mankind were meant to be sacrificed.
I know this has been said before, Robert, but it's only, and this is the importance of reminders and remembering and making sure that days like this are commemorated, because only when you hear the personal stories, particularly those survivors that can talk about their childhood and seeing their parents being taken that way, were sent that way, other kids also went the same direction as their parents. I have no idea how people ever got over that or even found a way to live with it. It's for those kind of reasons, and of course what it all represented and what the liberation represented and what led up to the liberation and the incarceration of a whole group of people. It's so vital that all of that is not just remembered but continues to be taught in history lessons. It's a marker for so many other aspects of life.
Well, absolutely. And it just strikes me that this could be the last Auschwitz commemoration where the survivors are actually present. I mean, it was 80 years ago. You'd have to be obviously a young child to be there. And that's what makes this particular event so important, that it may be the last one when they're there. But I hope and trust that we continue to commemorate and remember these awful events well into the future. Never again, it said, well, it's important that we do make sure that something shameful and awful as the Holocaust never happens again in human history.
It's interesting, King Charles is actually the first monarch, which surprised me, to visit Auschwitz.
Yeah, that did surprise me as well, and it's great. Obviously, it's really, really important that he is there as well. I think he has said today it's a deeply personal mission for him today, and I'm absolutely sure that's right. I think it'll have a deep impact on him, as it does for anyone who visits that camp.
Robert, stay with us. Robert Taylor, political commentator and journalist, is with us on the programme. Lots more to come. If you want to comment on those stories so far, 0344 499 1000. Still to come, what is likely to happen to your council tax, or could happen. It's a crime scene, frankly. And what police officers have been told not to say this time for fear of upsetting some folk. You won't believe it. Details on the way, 0344 499 1000.
There's a string of councils that are so close to going under, they are literally going bust, that they're using a special provision that enables them to hike council tax by up to 25%. The state has got so unwieldy, it's got so huge. 1 in 12 Londoners is an illegal immigrant. It has huge cost implications that we as a country are literally on the verge of going bankrupt.
Across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk on Trump. Susie says Trump is a president who's getting things done. If only Starmer took a leaf out of his book. This from Barry. At the end of the day, Trump is a patriot, loves his country. So different from Starmer. One here, no name given. The election of Trump has offended your woke sensitivities. We need more Donald Trump and less Ian Collins in Britain. Well, considering I agree with Trump, that's an extraordinary analysis. But hey, we always like to read out the dead wood as well, even the anonymous stuff. Let's go back. Robert Taylor is with us, political commentator and journalist. Interesting story coming out of local councils, Robert. More than 4 million people facing council tax rises above the maximum normally allowed by law. And of course, remember, we thought Keir Starmer, he was quite clear, said no more rises. Let's have a listen.
Labour would freeze council tax next year. Yes, you heard it right. Not a penny more on your council tax. Not a penny more than the bill you paid last year.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty unequivocal stuff, Robert. We now learn that over 4 million people are facing significant rises above the usual 4.99% cap. Some councils, including Windsor and Maidenhead, Theresa May's former constituency, are proposing hikes of up to 25%.
Yeah, I mean, how anyone believes a word that Keir Starmer says now, given his history of flip-flopping and frankly deceiving people, is beyond me. So some council tax rises are going to be, as you say, 25%, which is 5 times the limit. They can apparently find some sort of loophole that means they declare themselves bankrupt and then they're allowed to charge people more. And this is just another symptom of Britain living beyond its means. And it's another symptom of big government, whether it be at the national level or at the local level. We're spending far too much that we can't afford. We're wasting money. For example, the Taxpayers Alliance, just to give one example of Southwark, has 21 staff earning more than £100,000 a year and has a 9.5 million art collection, according to the Taxpayers Alliance, though less than 1% of it is on display. There's a whole bunch of waste in local government, and it's we, the council taxpayers, who have to foot the bill.
Yeah. I mean, I shudder to think what a Southwark Council art collection actually looks like, but that's another story. We can only imagine the sort of things they thought were a worthy purchase. This one symbolises oppression. Lump of old clay sitting there on a plinth somewhere. But nonetheless, if it's worth 9-10 million quid, sell it, for goodness sake. But don't let common sense, I suppose, stand in the way of what local councils like to do. Here's another beauty. Police officers told not to say black sheep or blacklisted over racism fears. I mean, this is extraordinary. We even got Navy bosses wanted to rename HMS Agincourt to avoid upsetting the French. These are the reasons why Donald Trump was elected, right? To go back to our first story.
When you see these stories, you just think Britain is going bonkers. On the blacklisting one, the word blacklisting, as I understand it, has nothing to do with the colour of people's skin. It's a completely different type of word altogether.
Yes.
And meanwhile, one of the councils that's doing that, apparently this is Bedfordshire, their crime stats, I looked them up this morning, Ian. Violent crime up by 5.2% last year, vehicle crime by 4.4%, shoplifting by 69% in Bedfordshire. Yet what are they doing? Telling their police officers not to use words like blacklisting. It's crazy. It's madness, and we've got to stop it.
And of course, it digs well deep into that whole DEI nonsense that you alluded to it at the beginning as well, Robert. This is a 9-page diversity guide that also encourages using the term pregnant person instead of pregnant woman. I mean, who today, having, by now, we've all heard, the arguments of what a bonkers system this is. You'd think there'd be no council or authority anywhere that would be advocating this stuff. And I always seem to say the same thing. Somebody sat in a meeting and suggested this, sitting around a table, grown adults, and went, why don't we go for pregnant person? They've also urged avoiding Christian-centric language like the term faith. And again, these are the sort of reasons why Donald Trump was elected, to battle against this, because it's just nonsense.
And resource has gone into this. A 9-page document means that you've got to have people there writing this up, discussing it, meetings. You've got to train people. Oh, don't use the word blacklisting. And all that resource should be going on stopping this violent crime. It's absolutely nonsense. As for the Agincourt thing, one of the contributors to Julia's show said, what about Trafalgar Square? When are we going to rename Trafalgar Square? And by the way, if the French are really offended by this, well, when are they going to start taking down the memorials to the French heroine Joan of Arc? So If we're going to do it, presumably we're going to get something back from the French. It's all barking mad.
Yeah, I'm just offended by the word France. I'd like that to be changed as well, maybe. I think perhaps we could, maybe have a sort of Blue Peter type suggestion competition. Rename France, what would you call it? And I can only imagine. It's interesting, one critic on this guidance questioned why terms like blacklisted are singled out, but whitewash is not singled out. So there you go.
Absolutely right. It says it all. It's diversity and inclusion, excess, wokery excess. It's all gone crazy.
It's nuts. Let's look at this final story. A couple who fly from Newquay to Crewe via Spain to collect their new car. So they're in Newquay, the car's in Crewe. They thought, right, let's go and collect it, check the train tickets. They realised that to go by train was going to cost them £200 per person one way, but to fly to Malaga and then over to Manchester cost 45 quid each, with a £45 hotel stay totalling £153 for the trip. So they got a trip. I heard of somebody doing this recently as well, who was meant to go from, I think it was Newcastle to London on a certain day at a certain time, and they couldn't make it work, so they decided to fly to Ibiza, have a day in Ibiza, and then fly back to London, and it was cheaper than the train fare.
Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And of course, on a train, you don't know if you get a seat. You'll probably be horribly delayed. Could be horrible antisocial behaviour.
Yeah.
Well, on the plane, you could get that as well, but it's less likely. And you get 8 hours in the sun in Malaga when you get to Spain. It's a win-win.
It certainly is a win-win, Robert, as it is when you're on with us as well. Thank you, Robert Taylor, political commentator and journalist with us on the programme. This comes from Ray, who says, I listen to Talk every day, but I keep turning you off, Ian. You are so left-wing socialist. You cannot hide it. You see, what's staggering about that, I'd love to sit with a pint with Ray. Ray would probably come out of it going, no, he feels like the socialist now. I haven't said anything about Trump's policies at all, only about Trump. Now, Ray is obviously a bit of a hero worshipper. He's 100% Trump supporter and 80% Farage supporter. See, I'm 100% Farage supporter, so therefore I'm ahead of you, Ray, on that. I'm probably ahead of you on the Trump thing. So, so left-wing and socialist. I mean, so left-wing. Not a bit left of where I am, but so left-wing and so, as left-wing as it gets. I mean, I don't know what example Raymond could give us to back that point up. And I honestly promise you, Ray, I'm absolutely sure Ray is a proper decent bloke who you can have a pint with and a chinwag with. I take no offence at that, but to suggest that I'm not utterly flummoxed when somebody makes that suggestion is extraordinary. Bearing in mind, reference Trump, I've said I pretty much agree with everything he's done so far. Like I mentioned, the brilliance of the Colombia thing, the DEI removal. I don't know what he could have just heard in the conversation me and Robert Taylor were having about Trump and DEI. All of that together, even if you just took 10% of that, would anybody analyse that and go, a bit left, let alone so left-wing and socialist? I mean, that makes you Jeremy Corbyn, right? That's somebody who pathologically hates all the things we just touched on. But listen, Ray, I'm happy to read that out. This one comes in from Bobby in Blackpool, who says, President Andrew Jackson made the USA wealthy and balanced the books, the only president who did it. On the likability of Trump, I wouldn't trust him in a business partnership, but on fixing the country, absolutely. He's anti-woke. That guy would get my vote every time. That's Bobby in Blackpool, who, based on Ray's analysis, is a left-wing socialist. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. 0344 499 1000. Just gone 1:30. More on this on the way. Tim Montgomery joins us to chat on that explosion of support for Donald Trump. Your thoughts on that as well. Why do you like the Donald? What's your own specific reasons? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
25 to 2 on Talk. This one comes from Dave in Chipping-Campden, who says, I doubt anyone likes Trump apart from himself, but many people admire his policies, which is the direction I was coming from, and his direct approach to getting things done, which to me is bigger than anything, because it's common sense, and deep down people know what common sense is. Absolutely bang on. That is as accurate a description as you could get. Max says, I like Donald Trump very simply because he runs the USA like a CEO rather than as a politician. We used to say this years ago when we did phone-ins on, who should be running the country. This is pre-Trump. And people would say, yeah, you need somebody in business. You need like a kind of Stuart Rose or an Alan Sugar kind of character. You think, what, the bloke from The Apprentice? Well, the Americans did elect the bloke from The Apprentice. Chris in Brighton says, speaking as a lefty, I like Donald Trump because of his many faults. He's an example of the fading of the woke mirage. Not all of us lefties are wokies. Now, that's absolutely true. There is a kind of the horseshoe thing. There's a whole load of people, those on the left who are also Brexiteers, the kind of Corbyn type, Dennis Skinnery, sort of Tony Benn area of life, who many of those people would be against the sort of woke agenda as well. Donald Trump is expected to visit the UK soon. That's as near as we've got, soon, after Prime Minister Keir Starmer became the first European leader to speak with the president since his inauguration. The pair discussed security in the Middle East and potential collaboration for trade and economic growth. However, the PM is likely to resist calls for an increase in defence spending. This comes as new polling reveals British voters largely support many of Trump's policies, including stricter immigration controls and a merit-based society. Let's speak with Tim Montgomery, founder indeed, of Conservative Home, and now, of course, a member of the Reform Party. Afternoon to you, Tim. There is literally nothing in this survey that surprised me, frankly.
No, nothing at all. No. By the way, just on the conversation you were just having with some of your listeners, Ian.
Yes. Oh, we lost Tim just at that very point. That was like one of those moments where there was a little hook that was dangled. Just on that conversation, you were happy. We will try and get him back. Lash says, great show as always. I've always said we have the wrong people in Parliament. We need business people, people who can make a calculated risk-based decisions, people who understand how to prosecute strengths and how to address weaknesses, people who understand how to construct and get the best out of teams, people who are not petrified of failure but learn from it. The only problem we have in the UK is people of that ilk wouldn't take a pay cut to serve the public good. Trump is exactly that kind of animal. Can you imagine a country being run by a Branson or a Dyson or an Alan Sugar, who I just mentioned? Brackets, maybe not Sugar. I was thinking the same. But the point still stands. Lash, thank you for that. Tim is back with us. Tim, you were mid-sentence there. You kept us hanging on that point on the back of the conversation we were just having, and then we lost you.
Well, I just like the suspense to generate here. That's what I wanted to. But no, just when I covered America for the Times, when it was Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, yeah. I remember going to a church, and they were all Donald Trump supporters, but they're absolutely clear. They said, we wouldn't want Donald Trump anywhere near our pulpit, but when it comes to fighting for someone to protect our children from trans in schools or something, he's our man. And that's why, he isn't always the best-mannered person. He is a bit uncouth. He's not the sort of person who'll necessarily pick up the knife and the fork the right way round at a dinner table. But when you want someone to fight for you, when you want a strong person to stand up for your values, people can recognise in him something different from the ordinary politician.
Yeah. Do you think because it's a lot about, he sets mood music, and he's straight talking in that respect. There was a couple of comments on the campaign trail, Tim, this year. He looked at an audience, I don't know where he was, Wisconsin or something, and he just said, I speak your language. And he said it with such conviction. I thought that is just so beautifully simple and about as powerful as it gets. I speak your language. You never hear Keir Starmer say something like that.
No, you don't. I will always remember from those times when I was, on the campaign trail. You know, they have the banks of people behind presidential and political speakers now. So you're not just looking at them, you're looking at all the faces watching. They always look interested when Donald Trump is speaking. True. I remember the Hillary Clinton rallies, and people were sort of falling asleep almost as they were trying to listen. And that sort of directness that you were just talking about, Ian, that fact that he was an entertainer, people knew him first from The Apprentice. You mentioned that as well. That matters a lot, because most people, they hear an average politician and they think they're not necessarily saying lines that have come from their heart or come from their own brain, but they've come from a committee of advisors. Whereas with Donald Trump, even when you disagree with him, I think the same is true of people like Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson as well. People think, well, they're telling me what they really think, even when I disagree with them. And I think people attach a premium to them. They want that in an age when they think they're always being, not necessarily being told the truth.
Yeah. Why do British politicians, though, not learn from this? I mean, I was watching... I don't know why I did it. I should have known better on a Sunday morning to put the BBC on, Tim. But the political journalist Laura Koonsberg, of course, has her own show. Kemi Badenoch was on there. You'll be aware of this. She was asked at the very beginning, what's her favourite Beatles song? And she replied, Yellow Submarine. Now, somebody who answers Yellow Submarine to that question is someone who's really hardly ever heard of the Beatles, let alone their songs. It was kind of almost nudging into the running through the farmers' cornfields territory when I heard that. And I just thought, I think this is the point that Kemi Badenoch might have been sunk to keep up the nautical reference at that point. It just, look, whereas somebody like Trump, and I would apply, by the way, the same to, Rachel Reeves was on there for a different reason. When I hear Keir Starmer interviewed, all of those guys, it's almost like somebody opened a packet of them. There isn't that, Farage-like character that you need. And I know it comes with caveats because, it's, on another way of looking at it is the kind of Del Boy thing, where people would go, yeah, I really love that guy. You wouldn't trust Del Boy in a million years, but he's likeable, he's on, tells it like it is, that kind of character. There are dangers with that, but we don't have many politicians that get anywhere near that kind of type, as it were.
No. And I think it's hard to know. I don't know what I would advise someone like Kemi Badenoch, because to be that sort of authentic character, to be the Del Boy, if you like, of politics, to be able to be trusted, to be able to say things wrong ever so often, that's not an easy thing to get to, because we are unforgiving towards certain politicians. How do you get to that place initially where you've had enough exposure where people will trust you to give an unusual reply or say something that you don't like, but you still have an affection for them afterwards?
Yeah.
There has to be a certain character, a larger-than-life TV presence. Although we're a social media age, it's still your ability to communicate on a screen like this one. We're talking to each other
100%.
Today.
Yeah,
it still matters, and people can, of course, HD TV and everything. They tell that we can really see the whites of people's eyes now. Yeah. Little bits of expressions on their face where they look like they're being a little bit evasive or whatever. We pick these things up now. We've been in this age long enough now to recognise when we think people are fidgety, they're nervous, they're not really levelling with us. And so we're unforgiving in many respects, and of our politicians if they look at all shifty.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because it's not necessarily about left-wing or right-wing. I mean, in a curious way, Jeremy Corbyn had quite a lot of this ability to connect in an interesting way. Very compelling speaker. Yeah. Almost the kind of messianic attraction to those that followed his politics, who absolutely loved him. And I remember 2017, wasn't it, Theresa May against, was it 2017, 2015? I'm losing my...
2017.
We've had so many elections, Tim. I've almost lost count. Absolutely. And I can remember before they did the TV debates, working elsewhere at the time, and lots of young people phoning in going, I'm going to vote for Theresa May. There became, for about 2 minutes, there became a bit of a kind of a sort of against type, almost vogue of going, the headmistress style woman. And then Corbyn, for many people for the first time, was unleashed into the TV studios, which was always a kind of, Hill/Timothy error, as far as I'm concerned, in letting Theresa May showcased the worst of her abilities against the best of Jeremy Corbyn's abilities, which was debating. And, of course, up he went. Even if you didn't agree with everything he said, he was passionate, he sounded like he meant it, he spoke from experience, he'd been there for 30 years, whatever it was. And suddenly, you know, it was, I'm Team Jeremy, a lot of these young people. It became very attractive because he had that same... And I wrote a piece a while ago about the correlation, the connections between Farage and Corbyn, and there are many of them in that respect.
Yeah. One of the big differences, you know, between reform voters and conservative voters, for example, is that a lot of reform voters are very anti-big business. They think big business, as much as big government, takes them for a ride. Now, that's not an opinion you'll get amongst a lot of conservative politicians.
True.
Reform understand that. And, of course, that is a link between Nigel Farage and Jeremy Corbyn. Correct. Both of them come from a slightly different tradition, and they're willing to attack big business. And big business is, in many ways, for lots of voters in our country today, as much of a problem as big government, because they have daily experience in their lives, whether it's through call centres or shoddy service or hidden bills, of feeling like they've been taken for a ride by people. And it's that sort of, you were talking about the horseshoe, you know, a little while ago, Ian, and there is actually a link between people more to the left and more to the right on some of these issues. Yeah,
I mentioned Brexit, of course. I mean, I know Corbyn's never fessed up, as far as I remember, to how he voted, but the smart money would say he'd be in the kind of Tony Benn Brexit department.
Well, I think so.
Yeah, without any doubt.
Yeah,
Listen,
no, I think he was definitely...
We lost your line again, Tim, right at the end, but thank you. I think Tim was going to say, I think he was definitely a Brexiteer. Not for the same reasons, by the way. So Nigel Farage's reasons for being a Brexiteer would be different to Jeremy Corbyn's reasons of being a Brexiteer, but they would have still voted on the same side. It's interesting. In the same way that, what's-his-face, in Bernie Sanders had more in common with Donald Trump than he did with Hillary Clinton, in a bizarre kind of way, for very similar sort of anti-globalist kind of reasoning, I sense. 0344 499 1000. It's an interesting set of conversations we've got going here, and it does feed into the overarching subject of what it is you like about Donald Trump. You know, Donald Trump has got a bit of a, you know, he's got an iffy CV in some respects. Now, how much would have to be on the iffy CV, whether it's Trump or anyone else, for you to go, doesn't matter how much I like him, because I can't get over all of that. Now, there was a lot of mischief around Donald Trump, and there was a lot of politicising things that he's supposed to have, as far as, you know, some of those prosecutors were concerned in the United States. He pretty much started World War III and invented death. You know, that's how bad it was. Let's get him in court. But not all of it. You know, there was a lot of genuine stuff there that's a bit iffy, whether it's about, you know, the fake elections, whether it's about stuff in his business life, tax. Even prior to becoming president the first time, there's a lot around Trump that you could say, you know, in any other world, this guy would not be getting a job, let alone the president. So how many things would have to happen before you would say, and the same in this country, you know, if you discover something bad about a politician, they're often gone now within about half an hour because they can't, there's no way they can carry on. 0344 499 1000. Specifically Donald Trump, bearing in mind that survey that said British voters largely support many of Trump's policies. What for you is the Trump attraction? Is it specifically about the policies? Is it about the way the policies are sold? Is it the Maya Angelou thing? It's how he makes people feel more than what he specifically says. Or is it a mixture of the two? 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
There's a string of councils that are so close to going under, they are literally going bust, that they're using a special provision that enables them to hike council tax by up to 25%. The state has got so unwieldy, it's got so huge. 1 in 12 Londoners is an illegal immigrant. It has huge cost implications that we as a country are literally on the verge of going bankrupt.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
I think Brad here has made a bigger point. Brad in Cambridge made a bigger point than he's realised. He says Nigel Farage could have got away with responding yellow submarine to the Koonsberg question. You need to have the personality to carry it off. And do you know what? With Farage, it wouldn't matter if people made the same. When Kemi Badenoch said yellow submarine, the instant analysis was this person knows nothing about music or popular culture or historic culture, nothing. It's just not that kind of, like Theresa May couldn't have. Remember when Corbyn, mentioned him again, was shown a picture of Ant and Dec and asked, who are those two people? He didn't know who they were. He was like, I don't know, I've got no idea. And they were pushing and go, come on, they're on the telequote. No idea at all. If Farage did that, that would actually be kudos to Farage, because he would, you know, Nigel doesn't know about the Beatles. That's what we like. He doesn't care about the Beatles. Doesn't care about that kind of stuff. Who cares? It's Nigel. He's got bigger fish to fry. Whereas Badenoch just looked out of touch. And with sympathy to her, if somebody just asks you, we were just talking about this during the break, and said, what's your favourite Coldplay song? You've got half a second. There'd be all of that. So it's not easy, I know, but Yellow Submarine, kind of probably the least liked Beatles song, I think we can reasonably say. This will be Dan in Warrington. How are you doing, Dan?
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Good as gold, thank you. What are your thoughts then? Yeah. Why do we like Donald Trump?
Well, because he's not a politician, is he?
Yeah, good point.
You know, and that is, I think that's what it comes down to. He sees a problem, and he wants to attack that problem, whatever the problem is. We've, you know, the last 30 years, both in America and here, we've had politicians, haven't we? We've had the academically gifted leading the countries, and the countries are a mess. Both countries are an absolute state, aren't they?
Yeah.
And you know, and he sees simple solutions to the problems. To sort of, I can only think if we had Farage in at the same time as Trump, it would be a great thing for the UK. You look at, for example, the boats that are coming across now. I think Trump would be saying to Nigel, well, do what you said you're going to do.
Yeah.
Take them back and drop them off in France. And Nigel will be like, it is a bit complicated, Donald, because the French will kick up a stink and they won't have it. And he'll be like, well, just do it. Just do it.
Would he? But the question is, would he do it? Because, you know, I've talked to Farage about this, and we've had Richard Tice came on the show, I think around about the time of the election, to explain the reform specific policy on we can send these boats back. But then loads of people, loads of lawyers said, no, you think you can, but actually you can't. Could Trump have, because Trump's already been stopped in his tracks on some policies, Dan, at the moment. Yeah. So, I mean, are there certain things he can do, and that gets a lot of exposure, but maybe there's many more things that he might not be able to do?
I think if you don't do it, if you don't have a go, then you're never going to find out, you know.
Yeah, true.
I think what the politicians do is they oversimplify problems. I mean, Julia Hartley-Brewer had, I think, a politician on earlier on the show, and she talked about taking the people back and dropping them off in France. And he was like, well, you can't do that. You just can't do that. But do you know what? He never had an answer. Julia had the answer. And this is the thing. When you actually do... We sent a task force to the Falklands, didn't we?
Yep.
2 aircraft carriers, all right, in a number of weeks. We got it going straight away. We went ahead and did that, and yet we can't stop a few dinghies.
We cannot stop a dinghy. We can do all manner of amazing, crazy stuff, but we can't stop a dinghy for some reason.
And whenever you look at, if you look at all the problems we've got today, if you look at a paedophile coming out of jail and reoffending, that's a politician that allowed that. If you allow foreign criminals to commit crimes in this country and not be deported, that was politicians. Now the lawyers get in the way, as you mentioned before, Ian. The lawyers do get in the way of this stuff, but our politicians are there to create them laws to stop things like that.
100%.
That's what they're there for. And so I can't get behind this thing where you can hide behind the judiciary, because especially when the Conservatives were in, for example, they had an overwhelming majority. They could have produced a bill, change the laws on
exactly. And I know our system is different to the American one. I know American president's position. They haven't got to worry about state laws, so it's a different setup. Your president concentrates on the big stuff and things like Trump is talking about. I know it's a different job, but the idea that you couldn't get somewhere near it is just ludicrous. Dan, I've got to move for no other reason than time. Thank you for that. Caroline is in London on this same question. Caroline, what are your thoughts?
Hi, Ian. Thanks for taking my call. Where do I start? Well, whether you like Trump or not, what I love about him, he is now treating this whole situation as a business. And as a business, you get things done. Yep. He's just proved that. He's just done, the deal with Colombia. He's also fearless. He's also putting American citizens first. I'm not saying he's not corrupt and all the other things. I don't actually care. He's giving America hope. He's got rid of the woke. When he made his speech and he said, from now on, we have 2 sexes in this country, male and female. We're getting rid of misinformation, disinformation, and we are having free speech. And he's also utilising what America has got. We are sitting on the oil and gas in our country. Yeah. We are not using it. We are going to be we'll have power cuts. We'll have the most expensive heating systems in the world. We are literally becoming very clearly a banana republic, and I don't say that lightly.
It's not looking pretty. Do you know what I heard a couple of days ago? I don't think this is true, Caroline. That Joe Biden issued more licenses to drill for oil than Donald Trump did when he was president.
Wow.
No, I don't know if that's true or whether that's just some kind of Biden supporter throwing that out there. But the reason I raise that is because with Donald Trump, it wouldn't matter if that was the case, because the die-hard Trump supporter wouldn't perhaps care. Listen, Caroline, I have to move. The news is upon us. Can somebody confirm or deny that? It's the kind of thing that could happen in a weird way. It's a bit like Obama's deportation numbers compared to Trump's. That's another one that's up for huge debate. 0344 499 1000 is where you'll find us. What is it about Donald Trump? Why do you like Donald Trump? Details, more of your calls on the way after the news on Talk at 2.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yes, welcome along to the socialist paradise of afternoons here on Talk. Donald Trump is expected to visit the UK soon. It might be the first visit of European countries. It could be because his first phone call to European leaders was with Keir Starmer yesterday, since his inauguration, a 45-minute chat they had. It comes as new polling reveals that British voters actually back many of Donald Trump's policies. We'll have more on that and comments from you on the way. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is said to be in lockstep with Chancellor Rachel Reeves on a third runway at Heathrow Airport, with an announcement expected as early as Wednesday. This is going to be the greatest reverse ferret we have seen forever. For a government that practices net zero like it's a religion. Just watch this space, and they'll find all manner of ways to justify, well, we changed them. It's an airport, guys. It's a flipping runway. You can't be net zero there and runway there. Well, we'll watch with interest. And King Charles says it's vital to remember the evils of the past as he becomes the first British head of state to visit Auschwitz on the 80th anniversary of its liberation. We'll have more on that, and we'll speak to the relative of one Holocaust survivor. 4 minutes after 2 o'clock, this one from Brian says, President Trump is a leader, Starmer is a puppet on a string. Bill in Romsey, Trump runs his country like a business, Starmer runs it like a politically correct charity. This one from Martin, I think Badenoch chose Yellow Submarine because it represents Britain at the moment. We all have that sinking feeling. Could be right. And Don in Chelmsford, the zest and enthusiasm of Trump emphasises just how depressing it is in the UK. We have a broken society and nothing in the public sector seems to work. That line, what was the line about a new beginning, the rebirth or something of Australia? The golden age, I think it was. The golden age has begun. It was incredible. Boris Johnson said that, of course. He was widely admired and voted for based on not dissimilar attributes in terms of invoking and instilling confidence and optimism. That was his greatest selling point on the doorstep. That all sort of went to a little bit of a mush. Latterly, as we now know, let's get a word on the big stories of the day. Bob Seeley is with us, former Conservative MP. Afternoon to you, Bob. I mean, you remember the heady days of Boris's enthusiasm, the sunny uplands. I mean, he was incredible at that. It was his greatest skill, arguably.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Ian. By the way, good afternoon. Good afternoon to you and listeners. Look, I like Boris on a personal level because his optimism was infectious. He was a happy person and he enjoyed life, and actually people warmed to him. The problem that we have now is that effectively he led a Conservative party and his policies were not very conservative when it comes to extreme net zero that we are now undoing, rightly so. A too lax approach to immigration, which is just completely wrong, and we are, living with the consequences. So on a personal level, I like Boris, but the problem is I say to a lot of Conservatives who like Boris, did you like his policies? And they say, well, no, we didn't. And the problem is that people ultimately vote for policies, and our policies were wrong. We spent 2 years trying to reverse that before the last election, but because of the Ukraine war, because of COVID, we couldn't turn things around fast enough. I wish Boris had been a bit more conservative, and I think things would have been different for him and for everyone else.
It's interesting, isn't it? I remember saying to friends and people I know sort of on the left who were sort of describing Boris Johnson as this sort of rabid, extreme right-winger, as the left often do, because anyone who's slightly to the right of their left is seen as some sort of bonkers extremist. And I was saying, if you'd have, prior to Boris Johnson being Prime Minister, if you were to say, name a right-wing Conservative MP, you'd have had to have gone through a lot of names before you got to Boris Johnson.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was slightly the Boris. As I say, the thing about Boris, he was very infectious, and he was a great guy on a personal level. He was very engaged. He's really intellectual. He loved his arguments and his classical allusions. So he had a lot of good personal qualities, some not so good personal qualities. Let's just put that out there as well. He had a lot of very good personal qualities. But, I mean, the policies that we adopted at the time, I think, came back to haunt us massively. Yeah. And the first one, and I felt it at the time going wrong, was HS2. And this is not because we don't need infrastructure. We really badly need infrastructure projects in this country. But there is a difference between good infrastructure projects and bad. And actually, the way that Boris would have signalled his absolute commitment to levelling up, to getting, to engaging with the North, and some of those left behind towns, would be to be a massive rebuilding of Northern Rail. And how did we help levelling up? By driving a railway through Buckinghamshire. How on earth that helps levelling up, I do not know.
Yeah, indeed. Fair point. We're talking about Donald Trump here as well, Bob. The kind of interesting parallels, I suppose. There is some synergy between Trump and Boris in that respect of enthusiasm. Mr.
Not
Trump,
in policy,
but not absolutely not in policy. But that sense that that Trump has with the American people and beyond, they like him for a number of reasons. But it is often how he says something. I mean, he is showing some words in action now with what he did with Colombia at the weekend, which was, I was tempted to say it's a stroke of genius. It wasn't a stroke of genius, it was just a stroke of common sense, wasn't it? That's what he stands for. Like, here's some bad people. They're going back to the very country they came from. Colombians go, no, you can't do that. He goes, yes, we can. Otherwise, there's a big old tariff coming your way. OK, yes, you can then. I mean, very simple. I think he was on the golf course when he made that decision.
We give Pakistan £450 million a year in aid. And there's a lot of visas going to Pakistan. And I think we need to start sending back illegal immigrants, criminals back to where they came from with lifetime bans. And if people don't like it, there are tools and measures that we can use, like stopping aid, stopping visas. We should do the same thing. And sometimes genius is just doing basic things that actually somebody has to step up and do them. And I'm really hoping that Kemi, new Conservative Party under new ownership, this is the sort of stuff that Kemi's absolutely got to grab. We have got to do things differently, because we all agree, sadly, all the polling shows that people don't think things are going to get better in this country. Don, sadly, who you quoted a few minutes ago, was absolutely spot on. It's our political temperature is frankly as grey as the miserable weather we're having at the moment. And there's an answer to this. And, if Kemi gets her chance, and if we get a chance again, we've got to come in and just be dealing with this. First week, get rid of these human rights acts that mean judges can overrule political decisions that we can't govern. I was reading another crazy case of human rights where you've got some Jamaican rapists who can't be deported because of some sort of manipulation and twisting of some human rights agenda or some family rights that he claims to have. I mean, we are living in crazy times, and actually if we did what Trump did, we'd be much better off for it. I'm not a huge fan of Trump, and I think he does some things terribly, but I mean, my God, that's clear leadership. And for me, the interesting thing is when he comes to this country, all his diplomats are going to be saying, please bite your tongue. Please don't say anything about Labour. Don't kick off about the left. And it's just going to be interesting to see how on message Starmer is going to be, or if he finds it impossible to stay on message and he starts giving Labour and indeed the British people the benefit of his opinions. And, if you look at all this polling, the stuff that he does and the stuff that he's doing, whether you like Trump or not, people appreciate those policies.
Absolutely right. And again, when it comes to, how Trump is able to impart that stuff compared to a lot of what we have, in this country, I always sense, Bob, there's a sort of a groupthink type Western leader out there. We've had it with leaders, with the sort of Trudeau-Macron kind of skin that is worn. And when it comes to immigration in particular, politicians left and right just don't want to break the kind of, conventional, neat, tidy, agreed line.
I completely agree. This started basically with New Labour back in '97, and I can tell you, I mean, as we know at the time, if you raise this as an issue, you're basically smeared with the racism brush, and that has ceased to work. But it has taken the best part of 20 years to turn that around. And if you look at the sort of stuff that Trump is doing, illegal immigration, deportations, 60% of British people agree with that. If you're looking at trade protectionism, maybe not such a good idea. I'm not sure I believe in it, but you've got overwhelming support for that. Probably the most important, along with immigration, merit-based, colourblind society, overwhelming support. Two-gender policy, overwhelming support. Even an end to net zero, not moderating, but an end to net zero, there is nearly 50% support for that policy when asked. But this is people in Britain, not people in the US.
Yes.
So there is whoever taps into that is going to do extremely well in the next election.
Let's look at the current government then, particularly the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, being accused of trying to bring Britain back into the EU through this European customs deal. We know that, in the DNA of most of the Labour front bench, in fact, I think probably all of them, there is an ideal world they would rejoin. Starmer has said no to a customs union, no to rejoining. But it does appear that he's meddling with quite a lot of agreements along the line. This is about the fifth or sixth thing I've read since last July that sort of suggests they are... Look, if they want to get a greater trade deal, fantastic, or whatever it is. But do you sense that there is a desire from our leaders, Bob, or our current leaders, to sneak us back into Brussels, as it were?
Yeah, look, Ian, they would dearly like to if they could. There's no question about that. I mean, I think one can overreact to things, and I'm a Brexiteer, but having better trade relationship with the European Union, I'm not against that at all. And I think one of the problems is that we haven't made as much use of the freedoms that we've got from Brexit. And even Starmer now sees this. Starmer was saying we can do more with AI. Now we're outside the European Union. And I think I think the Labour Party is going in lots of different directions at once at the moment. But clearly, after a truly awful 6 months in government, where they've effectively imploded whilst in office, they are now beginning the slow realisation as reality hits their agenda. We've seen that because we're going to have this big announcement about a third runway. So all the time in opposition, they were against it. Starmer voted against it. Now he's in favour. Rachel Reeves at Davos, I've got the quote in front of me. My instincts is to have lower taxes, less regulation, make it easier for business to do business. Hallelujah. Better late than never. She's done so much damage to the economy that even she now realises that she cannot continue with these economically suicidal policies that Labour have put in. So effectively, they're distancing themselves from their first catastrophic 6 months. Do I think it's going to wash with the British people? No, because I think we've seen what Labour is red in tooth and claw. But I think what they're now going to try to do is reverse some of the more damaging aspects of some of the things that they were trying to do. I don't think they're going to succeed, but frankly, anything that stops the hemorrhaging of business confidence and us going into a recession is good. And, as regards Heathrow, again, I mean, I've been called a NIMBY so often in my life. Big infrastructure projects are so important for the country. What we don't need is endless greenfield low-density housing estates when we've got so much space in our inner cities and such low density in our inner cities. But we should absolutely be building more runway space in the southeast. That's true. I'd personally like to see the Boris Airport somewhere in the in the Thames Estuary, 4 or 5 runways. Then you could shut down Heathrow and turn it into a new town, and you actually don't need to then keep building on greenfield sites all over the southeast, because you can build a new green town outside London called Heathrow.
Indeed. And what's interesting about this, and I mean, you really couldn't make this up, Bob. And if you suggested it for a plot in the thick of it, you'd be Iannucci would laugh you out the room and say, no, this would never happen. But the clash with the net zero ideology taking it from Labour's own perspective, we are net zero. You're all got to have a windmill on the top of your car and your house, solar panels on your kids' backpacks, and God knows what else. And anything other than that will not do. We're against petrol cars. We're against a fire that has a bit of wood on it, because that's bad as well. But we're going to give the go ahead now, because it looks as if Keir Starmer has reportedly dropped his opposition to the third runway. And of course, surely in any other world, Ed Miliband would go, I resign. I cannot be part of a government. But of course he won't, because they'll say, don't worry, we're going to plant some trees in Cleethorpes and that's going to offset it somehow so everybody's happy. I mean, this is a nonsense.
It is a complete nonsense, and it's not only Miliband, but he is the zealot in chief. He is the Archbishop of Canterbury of this net zero.
Yes.
This incredibly damaging net zero religion, which is not going to save the world, but is actually going to impoverish people in this country and, frankly, deindustrialize us at a really alarming rate. You know, we do need to look after the environment. Nobody's disputing that. We do need to be clean, and nobody's disputing that. For me, the real damage of net zero is it actually pollutes the world even more, because all we're doing, we're exporting our industry, our heavy industry, our steel making, to China, that is building 2 coal-fired power stations. Coal is the single biggest contributor to global warming. They're building 2 coal-fired power stations every week to manufacture the stuff that we no longer make, to sell it back to us. So they're using very often slave labor. They're using appalling environmental technology, i.e. coal-fired power stations from, centuries ago, decades ago, that we've practically have stopped using, in order to enrich themselves by selling us back the things that we no longer make in this country. If we actually had a coherent energy strategy, we would be onshoring our heavy industry, and our emissions would go up a bit, but not half as much as they would if this stuff was being produced in China. So it's not only the zealotry and this sort of sub-Marxism of Ed Miliband, which is so appalling, but actually the fact that he's destroying communities and ruining lives and ruining our economic growth for something which is actually counterproductive for the world. It is the opposite of good politics, and the fact that he's now just a hypocrite is literally the little glacier cherry on the top of this absolute pile of hypocrisy.
Absolutely right. The Archbishop of Bollards, I think we can possibly say.
Very nearly,
just about get away with that, can't we? Listen, Bob, great to have you on with us. We will speak again soon. Bob Seeley, former Tory MP, big common sense voice from the world of politics. Thank you to him. We'll have more from you as well in a couple of moments. We can talk about anything we've just touched upon there. That's how this show works. It is the empire of common sense. Why do you like Donald Trump? Simple question. What is the Trump thing about? Why can we not replicate that level of I think common sense is the only word that springs to mind. It's another phrase that Trump also used. It's just common sense. It's just common sense. It's obvious. You're getting rid of black sheep and blackboards and blacklisting, and you can't say mankind. You can't say mankind. You've got to say humankind instead. Really? You can't say pregnant women, you've got to say pregnant people. No one with a brain thinks this old guff is okay. And yet, it's getting a free pass all over the place. It's all over. You want to call yourself of course you want to be a woman? You can be a woman. What, do I have to have an operation or something, or change my... No, none of that. Just call yourself a woman. But I've got a big beard and a penis. I might kind of go against the basic gist of the woman thing. No, not in this world, no. No, it's fine. You can be schlonger aplenty down there. We don't care. Just call yourself a woman. What, with this thing? Yes, it's fine. Look, I've got the beard. The beard and the voice. Doesn't matter. If you're a girl, you're a girl. Well, just call myself, yes. And everyone around the world will have to acknowledge you as such as well. It's that kind of old nonsense that's put Donald Trump in the White House. Make no mistake. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
There's a string of councils that are so close to going under, they are literally going bust, that they're using a special provision that enables them to hike council tax by up to 25%. The state has got so unwieldy, it's got so huge. 1 in 12 Londoners is an illegal immigrant. It has huge cost implications that we as a country are literally on the verge of going bankrupt.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 23 minutes after 2 o'clock, right here on Talk. Tom says, I like Trump because he's got wonderful hair. Yes, the hair is the best hair in the world. This one from Cliff. Trump has one major advantage. He is president of a nation that is not so infected by socialists. No leader of a UK party could get a Trump type of agenda through because we have leftists everywhere. And that's what matters. The mainstream media, civil service teachers, senior judges, police forces. That's what a would-be Trump administration would come up against. Absolutely spot on. And Bob was making the point. You've got to look at Boris Johnson. Interesting example, because Johnson did have some of the Trump skin about him in the kind of enthusiasm bit. Life's going to be great, trust me. There will never be a border in Northern Ireland. Blah, blah, blah. Just tell them to come and see Boris. Blah, blah. Lots of that sort of bluster and stuff. And most of it was garbage because it simply wasn't true. Boris Johnson was one of the most liberal-minded people. I never believed for 1 second. You know, the greatest offence that he was a Brexiteer. Not for 1 second was Boris. And yet, you know, he was the voice of it. A bloke that didn't even believe in Brexit. There's nothing in his backstory that would have taken you in that direction. He didn't like some of the nincompoopery coming out of Brussels, and he used to write a lot about bendy bananas and God knows what in his Telegraph column. It's quite amusing stuff. But I don't think there's nothing to suggest that Boris Johnson was ever a Brexiteer. He was never in that discussion or narrative prior to suddenly announcing himself as the face of the campaign. But it got him elected and it won some plaudits and he had the job for about half an hour as Prime Minister. Elaine is in Derbyshire on Donald Trump. What have you got for us, Elaine? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I like Donald Trump because I think he makes people reveal themselves for who they really are. So they were all calling Donald Trump a racist and a fascist, and then they quickly dusted off their Armani suits and went to the inauguration.
Yes.
I don't know about you, Ian, but I wouldn't go to a racist party. Would you?
No.
I don't care who it is. And even David Lummy's bending the knee. And I'm a black lady, and I am especially looking forward to the dismantling of the DEI. Mm-hmm. I think that you only hire based on merit. And I think they don't realise how racist they are when they talk about segregated, colleges and workplaces. It doesn't matter why you're doing the segregation. You're doing segregation. And it's like my son, he's 25, and I told him never ever take a job with a company if they're hiring you based on the colour of your skin and not on the merit.
Because you'd never know, would you, otherwise? You'd never really fully know after you got the job whether you were employed because of the colour of your skin or because of your gender or whatever, or whether it was your ability.
Your colleagues won't respect you, but I think he has a really good way, Donald Trump, of just making these people reveal themselves for the weak, sometimes racist, soft racist that they are. You see them all saying all this stuff, virtue signaling, and then as soon as he comes in, you see the Colombian president, he's talking the big talk, and then as soon as the terrorists come, I'll send my plane over, Mr. Trump. What shall I do, Mr. Trump? Shall I put some water in the plane for them, Mr. Trump? It's ridiculous. They're full of nonsense. And he reveals these people and the journalists for who they really are. All these organisations, it's ridiculous. You won't take Donald Trump, you won't take Elon Musk buying a company, a football team, but you'll take one of the Saudis who throw people off buildings and chop people's hands off.
100%.
Really?
Yeah. 100%. Elaine, it's a very powerful call. Thank you very much indeed for that, Elaine in Derbyshire on Donald Trump. This one from Brad in Cambridge. Ironically, I think Kemi would have made a better Prime Minister than she does leader of the opposition. I was thinking that watching her yesterday on that interview on the telly in the morning. If reform didn't exist and Nigel Farage wasn't there, I think the way we would view Kemi Badenoch would be entirely different. I think it would be a completely different set of circumstances. Although you can't help but think that much of what she says now, she says because Farage is there and may not be quite as forceful and could still be part of that strange kind of liberal groupthink. Establishment, I think, is probably the better word. Establishment groupthink. Had reform not kind of made this huge stage entrance in the last year or so. 0344 499 1000. Debbie is in Bradford on Donald Trump. What have you got for us, Debbie? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian. I absolutely love Donald. I mean, I rushed on from work last Monday to watch the inauguration.
Nice.
And boy, has that man got some kahunas.
Yeah.
I mean, he stood up and said it like it is. I could physically see Kamala Harris sinking into a chair with her arms crossed.
Why do they think, just out of it, on that point, Debbie, because, I mean, when it comes to, you know, inept and horrendous politicians, Kamala Harris is, you know, I don't think many people could beat her in that respect. Where do those types of politicians get their thinking from, that they are speaking on behalf of somebody?
Well, do you know what? When Kamala Harris was sort of promoted, you know, because Sleepy Joe stepped back, and I kept seeing online about her talking, you know, talking word salad, and I actually sat down and watched an interview, and I didn't understand what she said. They asked her a question, and she never really answered it. I don't even know what she said. She was just talking a lot of rubbish.
Yeah.
Donald, I mean, I watched him at the weekend. He went to LA and he sat down with all the, you know, he went into that firehouse and the mayor was there. Oh my God, is she 3 sheets to wind? And it literally, right, all the Democrats that were sat around, and one of them, I had to laugh, and he said, oh, we're putting things in place, you know, to safeguard it. So Donald just said, you mean like water? Do you know what I mean? It just comes straight out with it. It's like us, Ian.
Yeah.
It's like us. And then you see two-tier Kia, you know, you watch him and he's that wooden, you get splinters. Do you know what I mean? I just want somebody like Donald Trump to stick up for us. He loves his country. He's sticking up for him. And I feel really let down. I fear for the future.
Yep.
And this shower that we've got, notice I didn't finish it off, but this shower that we've got in government, oh my God, you know, they don't even care about us. They're not bothered about us. They're more bothered about these people coming into the country uninvited. You know, it's an absolute disgrace. I love him for his vigour, and he's 78 years old, Ian.
Yeah, he's doing all right, isn't he, in that respect? I mean, this is a man that looks very much, you know, he's a lively character, and he's got an idea. I said this before the election, you know, he has an idea, and that's the point, an idea, and that word, those two words, common sense. Listen, Debbie, you've been brilliant. Again, some great calls this afternoon. Real passionate stuff from her. You just don't ever get that sense, that same sense. And when Starmer talked about, I mean, it was so ill-advised when he talked about the, what was it, the mad right-wingers and right-wing bandwagon and all the rest of it. And do you know what? He could have qualified it. He could have said, look, there's a load of utter right-wing nutjobs out there kicking off, setting fire to things and wanting to kill people. I've got no truck with them. However, I do understand that there is, you know, a far bigger group of people out there that have got real concerns, and this narrative, sadly, because of the backdrop of how it began, has thrown up that discussion. Let's have that discussion. Let's have it properly. But he didn't. He tried to shut it down in such a horrendous and anti-intellectual way. But, you know, establishment groupthink, just write off everything and ignore the blindingly obvious. Ignore common sense, ignore the thirst and appetite of ordinary working people who've had enough of so much, whether it's about immigration, but more than that, cost of living, NHS, all of these things. You want somebody to sound like they are beginning to mean business. 0344 499 1000. More from you on the way. 2:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, coming up on 25 to 3. Now, world leaders, royalty and dignitary are meeting at Auschwitz today to mark the 80th anniversary of its liberation. The King is among those that have travelled to Poland to remember more than 1 million people, mostly Jews, who were murdered by the Nazis. We know the Prime Minister as well is speaking at the Holocaust Memorial Day UK national ceremony as well. There is a lot to talk about. Let's speak with Sandra Miller, daughter of Sabina Miller, Holocaust survivor. Sandra, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Look, I know this gets said all of the time, but frankly, it can't be said enough how vital it is that we mark these days, particularly a poignant day. You know, the 80 is a rounded number, but it's equally as important as 78 and 79 and 81. But it's still vital that we make sure that this day remains, you know, part of the international calendar.
Absolutely. It's so important for youngsters to understand what happened. I mean, there are so many Holocaust deniers at the moment, or Holocaust doubters, that it's an extraordinary experience to be able to go around to schools, which I do. I work for a charity called Generation to Generation. They're a brilliant organisation that provides speakers who talk in schools and universities and businesses for free, anybody that will have us, in order to tell them the stories of our personal family stories. Because if you talk about 6 million people, you feel disconnected.
Yeah.
If you talk about one specific family or one specific relative, suddenly the whole thing becomes much, much more real. And that's what today is about. It's about a series of individuals who experienced horrendous horrors, and the world needs to know about it and needs to remember.
Absolutely right. I mean, you mentioned individual cases. Let's talk about your mum, Sabina. What is the story there? Tell us more.
The story simply is that she was born in 1922. She lived in Warsaw, the capital of Poland. She came from a fairly religious family. She had an older brother, Chaim, an older sister, Esther, on whom she doted, 2 younger brothers. One died prematurely, and her parents, and they lived very happily. They were observant Jews, but even early on in the early 30s, so for example, her older brother Chaim wanted to enlist in the army, but because they were observant Jews, they only ate kosher food, that was meat. killed in a specific way, and the army made no provision. So there was already some kind of anti-Semitism in the sense that he wasn't allowed to join the army. Her older sister Esther wanted to go to Warsaw University to study medicine, and the authorities wouldn't let her. She could only study languages. And what's more, when she got to university, she wasn't allowed to sit down. She had to stand on the left-hand side of the hall. Absolutely. Anyway, obviously when Hitler was in power in 1938 in Germany, not yet in Poland, things started to get bad. And then the bombing of Warsaw in 1939 ensured that the Warsaw Ghetto was established. And this was a specific area of the city, cut off from the rest of the city, where my mum and her family had to move from her very comfortable home into an area of 1.3 square miles. That's the equivalent of 630 football pitches, but with 400,000 other people. So it was really squashed. Disease was rife. Typhus was everywhere. And sadly, my mum lost her father died. And she herself got typhus. And she told me a lovely story of when she was unconscious in the ghetto with typhus. She had a memory of something that she thought made her survive the war. She remembers seeing her mum at the end of her bed dressed in a long white nightdress that my mum remembered from childhood. And her mum said to her, "You will survive. You must live. You will get through." Anyway, when she woke up, she couldn't believe that her mother was dead, and she had a very hard time accepting that. Eventually, Chaim, her big brother, got her and her young brother, David, out of the ghetto. They bribed a Polish man to take them, put them on a train for a place called Sokolov, which was where an aunt lived. And incidentally, they put coats over there. In the Warsaw Ghetto, they wore blue badges, not yellow badges, to show that they were Jewish. And they put coats over them to hide the fact they were Jews. When they were sitting in the train, David had to sit on the floor. And my mum remembers he was kicked by fellow passengers who said to him, "Where are you going, you little Jew?" He was 12 years old at the time. Wow. Anyway, they arrived at their aunt's, and of course she was delighted to take them in, but terribly upset to hear about the death of their parents. And for a while everything was fine. Then my mum thought she should be making her own way in the world, and she heard that there was a farm nearby that needed 30 Jewish women to work on the farm, and the goods from the farm were to be sent to Germany. So her aunt argued with her, said she didn't need to go, but my mum insisted, went to work on the farm. Everything was fine, although they were treated very harshly. But eventually they were told that Germans were coming to shave their heads. My mum had the nous to understand that if their heads were shaved, they would be easily identified as Jews. She'd made a close friend at the farm, a girl called Rushka, and she'd also noticed that behind the farm there were forests, woods. Now, it was very well known that Germans didn't like the woods because that's where the partisans formed their little battalions to fight against the Germans. So my mum persuaded Rushka. They went to the woods and watched as everybody else had their heads shaved. When they came down, they worked a bit more, and then the foreman of the farm told them that the Germans were coming to take them away. He didn't want them on their conscience. My mum tried to persuade all the girls to come to the woods, but they wouldn't go. They said, maybe it won't be so bad, and anyway, we've probably lost our families now. They were just beaten down by all that had happened. My mum, however, was very stubborn. She and Rushka went to the woods. They knocked on the door of various houses to beg for bread, and one Polish farmer took them to a trench that had been built by the partisans. This was about 2.5 meters wide and 2 meters. You couldn't stand up in it. You had to slide down to get into it. And they lived in that trench for a few months over the winter of 1942. It was freezing cold. They had lice all over their body. They were undernourished. Obviously, the Polish people who gave them food were taking enormous risks with their safety, but they gave them bread. They told them not to come together. It was too suspicious. So eventually they came one by one at night. And one night it was Rushka's turn to go, and she never came back. My mum was on her own. She was terrified, but carried on living in that trench. One night, she went to a farm, and she saw a girl sitting at the table crying her eyes out. She had received a letter from the Polish authorities saying she had to come to a place in Warsaw to be sent to Germany to work as slave labour. And the girl's mum, she didn't want to leave because she had a fiance. The girl's mum talked to my mum to find out how good her Polish was. Because in those days, many Jews spoke Yiddish at home, and they spoke Polish with a broken or a heavy accent. My mum's Polish, however, was fluent, as the native she was. And to cut a long story short, she went instead of the girl. She became a girl called Kazimiera Kutz. When they got to the administrative centre, the woman in charge of the new recruits was lovely and took Mum to one side, said she'd have to cut her hair, took her to a Polish doctor who tried desperately to get her feet in a good condition. Her feet were frozen because of living in the woods for the whole winter, because she had to go to the German medics on the 5th floor, and the Germans only wanted healthy girls to work on their farms. Sadly, my mum failed the medical. She was sent to hospital, came back, failed another medical, and eventually they gave her an exit card. And Mum didn't know what to do. She had no home. She told the Germans, said, go home and get well. And my mum said, well, it's because we're so poor that I got this ill, because I have no shoes. So she had rehearsed what to say if she didn't pass the medical anyway. Eventually, they gave her an exit card, which said they didn't want her as slave labour. She went back to the dormitory. She found two sisters, one of whom was crying because she didn't want to leave her boyfriend. And Mum said, look, I'll give you this exit card if you let me go in your place. And they didn't understand why she would want to go in their place, but of course the girl wanted to stay. And that's when she failed the medical again, but had this exit card which she traded for this woman's identity. All went well. They went to the canteen one day to wait for a transport to Germany, and the server said to her, "You're Jewish." She called the Gestapo. Mum was interviewed by the Gestapo. She was beaten up. She lost several teeth, and then she was sent to Gestapo headquarters in Warsaw, where she was questioned again, but not beaten up. She told them she was a woman called Kazimiera Borkowska. She told them she came from Grodziec, a town 20 kilometers from Warsaw. She told them everything about her family. And eventually they didn't know what to do with her. They sent her to the Pawiak. Now, the Pawiak was the notorious prison that the German occupiers used for political prisoners, Jews, anyone they didn't like the look of. But very luckily, my mum was put in a cell with other Polish prisoners, another 9 girls, not the Jewish cell. Had she been put in the Jewish cell, her death would have been definite. She was interviewed by the Gestapo a further 3 times. She denied she was Jewish. She just kept the story of that she was Kazimiera Borkowska. And eventually, by some miracle, they released her. She was safe. So in order to be sent to Germany to work as slave labour, which is what she wanted, she had to go back to the administrative centre. And when I was a child growing up, I never understood why she would willingly want to go to Germany. Surely at that time, the Germans were her enemies. And she explained to me that if she could be passed as slave labour, as a Polish slave labourer, she would get 3 meals a day and she could live out the war on a farm in Germany. And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
And eventually, when the war was over, she thought she was the only Jew left in Europe. She was sent by the British to a Papenburg, a displaced persons camp. And she finally was sent to a rabbi in Mannheim to get her identity back.
Yeah.
She met my dad. He was Jewish, but he happened to be in the Polish army. And they got married in Papenburg in 1947, and they came to Britain. And my mum thought this was the most amazing country. She loved the freedom and the liberty we have here. And for the last 20 years of her life, she spoke to schools and universities and tried to spread her message of tolerance and the fact that we should celebrate our differences. And so I always promised her I would continue to tell her story. So I go to schools and businesses and universities and anyone that will have me on behalf of the charity Generation to Generation. And we try and spread that message of tolerance and embracing difference. So this morning I've already done one, I've presented to one school. Tomorrow morning I'm presenting to another. And this week is obviously very, very busy for us.
Of course.
But we do it throughout the year. And it's a great thing to do, I think.
Absolutely. And just extraordinary that your mum went through all of that for having the audacity to exist. I mean, that's ultimately what we're talking about here. Just by dint of being alive and having a suspicion that she might be the wrong religion or the wrong backstory, was forced to go through many years of turmoil.
But also, we need to remember, they did murder 6 million Jews, but they also murdered lots of homosexuals, disabled people, Jehovah's Witness, anyone that was different.
Sure.
So, that's a really important lesson we have to teach our children. Underneath it all, we are all the same. We may externally be different, but we are all people, and people deserve respect and honour. And, we just need to get on. We may have different opinions, different views, different religions, different languages, but we need to find a way to get on.
Absolutely. Listen, Sandra, thank you for your time. Really appreciate you sharing that story. Sandra Miller, daughter of Holocaust survivor Sabina Miller. And it is rather interesting, set that against the backdrop of some of the disturbing levels of anti-Semitism that we've seen in recent years in this country, particularly in the last sort of year or so, in public, not covert, underground, dodgy anti-Semitic groups, but public protests, people carrying banners, Jews go home and goodness knows what else. I mean, horrendous. The Nazi propaganda and memorabilia being waved in front of people in the street and nothing happening, by the way. And I can't imagine what somebody like Sandra's mother, having gone through, you heard the extensive chronology of what she experienced from being a young girl and all of those various chapters of her life. Escaping and moving and trying to keep your head down, etc. But going through what would have been, turmoil, and she would have been seen as one of the lucky ones, which is just gives you some flavour of context. But had she been around today to turn on her TV and seeing, anti-Jewish propaganda paraded through the streets of the capital city, unchecked, I have no idea how she could have digested that, and how other Jews that were not just those experienced or who experienced the Holocaust, but families of, and anyone for that matter, we should all be disturbed by that. It's almost as if the story is not yet over in some respects. Holocaust Memorial Day, it's the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Thank you to Sandra Miller. We'll take your comments and calls on that as well. 0344 499 1000.
There's a string of councils that are so close to going under, they are literally going bust, that they're using a special provision that enables them to hike council tax by up to 25%. The state has got so unwieldy, it's got so huge. 1 in 12 Londoners is an illegal immigrant. It has huge cost implications that we as a country are literally on the verge of going bankrupt.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk coming up on 5 to, just gone, 10 to 3. You know, the ballpark, roughly. Shirley is in the Cotswolds. Shirley, back to that question we were asking at the beginning about Donald Trump. What are your thoughts? Hi.
Hi, Ian.
Hello.
The main thing, I think, is if you're a true Brit, we all love a character. And Donald Trump, love him or loathe him, he is a character, as was Boris Johnson.
Yep.
We don't like the pompous types like David Cameron, who treat us all like minions, and who Keir Starmer's doing the same to us. Donald Trump, I love the fact that whenever he's on, when the inauguration, most of the important occasions, he's flanked by his family, who obviously adore him. His ex-wife was at the inauguration, Marla Maples, and I just love, if he was so bad, why do these women still have a good relationship with him? He has been a naughty boy in his past, but he was wealthy and probably quite good looking, so he would always have swarms of women around him. I know he wasn't a politician then, and his behaviour was terrible, but he's a politician now. I do think he's a big family man. His family are immaculate. They're a credit to him, and he's doing exactly what he said he would do on the can. So I'm a big fan.
There it is. Shirley, beautifully put, very fluent. Thank you. Shirley in the Cotswolds, 0344 499 1000. I'll do some more messages in just a second. We've got the voice of doom, by the way. What is it? Day 12? 13? Day 13 of the voice of doom. Now, something rather interesting happened on Friday. I'll tell you about in just a second. Remember, this is the political mystery voice feature thing. Here's the voice that hasn't gone for 13 days.
Give me hundreds of examples.
The clue I'd been giving is that this person had actually been mentioned in the last sort of 2 weeks on the news. And even on this programme, I'd even mentioned the person's name as part of a news story. So that was the clue. Have a listen to the voice again.
Give me hundreds of examples.
So on Friday, somebody did message in and got it right. Slightly too late, but they didn't leave their name. So... And then loads of other people who clearly wrote in or messaged in and got it wrong, but also didn't leave their name, thought we were referring to them. But we weren't, because we never heard back from the person who got it right. So it has been got, but not by one person, and we don't know who that person is. So it's rolled over to today. Don't phone in. There is no prize, never is on this, but you can message in if you fancy it. 87222. If we get a right answer, we will reveal all on the other side of the news at 3. If we don't, it rolls over to day 14 tomorrow. Here's the voice again.
Give me hundreds of examples.
87222. No, it's not Hazel Blears, Andrea Leadsom and loads of the others that every single day, there seems to be like 10 names that always get mentioned. It's none of them. It's not Claire Short either. Derek's in Manchester on Donald Trump. Derek, what have you got for us? Hello.
Well, you were asking earlier what we like about Donald Trump.
Yeah, what is it about specifically Donald Trump? What is it we like? And why do we like somebody who in any other world we might hate?
Well, I don't know about any other world might hate him. I mean, at the end of the day, what isn't there to like about him? Well, I've spent all my life voting for absolute idiots as far as I can see. And all of a sudden, this guy comes along who actually promises what he's going to do. And on the first day, he starts actually doing it. I've never seen it before. It's just never happened in my lifetime. I mean, we've got a bunch of absolute muppets that can't turn around to France and say, look, you know, you strengthen your borders up, because you're the reason we're getting all these people across ours, or pay our bills for us. You know, I mean, what is the problem with saying that to France? I really do not understand it, because if it wasn't for their porous borders, or the EU's porous borders, they wouldn't be getting to France in the first place. And then
it's a very good point. Although, could we end up like with the reverse happening, because obviously we're not quite as powerful as the United States. Nice to think we would be.
You mean everyone leaving here and going to France? I don't think so.
No. Could we end up with a situation where if we put everybody who came over on a boat back to France, then the entire EU shoved sanctions and tariffs on us?
Oh, big deal.
Well, we might be slightly scuppered by that.
Yes, but wouldn't that teach us to... I mean, well, didn't happen during the last World War. Wouldn't that teach us to be a little bit more self-sufficient? Wouldn't that have stopped us getting rid of all our industry, which we have no longer got? I mean, we were conned from day one with this lot. I mean, it's not just Tony Blair. Tony Blair was the biggest instigator of mass immigration on us. But even before that, I mean, if you remember Margaret Thatcher back in whatever, I think it was it 79?
79 she came in.
Yeah, in 79. I mean, she got in. She made a speech saying, "Oh, we're really rather swamped with foreigners," you know, whatever she said. And the next day, the Sun put a great big headline across, "Margaret Thatcher's a racist." And of course, everyone voted for her because that's what they wanted. You know, or they wanted someone that was going to do exactly what they said. And what was the first thing she did? Michael Howard gave an amnesty to all the illegal immigrants.
Yeah, I'm sure there was some. Yeah, I'm sure that's probably the Daily Mirror. I can't imagine the Sun doing that. Listen, Derek, thank you for that. Derek in Manchester on Donald Trump. And Ralph in Liverpool makes a good point. PM doesn't have Trump's executive powers. That's an American presidential thing. Having said that, even if the PM of the UK had that power, they wouldn't do very much with it, especially on immigration, says Ralph. Voice of Doom. Will we get a winner on the other side of the news? This is The Voice.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Don't call, no prize, but you can message in 87222. We'll get some news headlines now at 3 o'clock here on Talk.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
Coming up on 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Good afternoon. Welcome back. Donald Trump is expected to visit the UK, quote, soon. We may well be the first European country he does take a trip to see, bearing in mind we were the first European country whose leader he chose to spoke to. This was his phone call with Keir Starmer yesterday, 45 minutes on the blower since his inauguration. It comes as new polling reveals that British voters actually back many of Trump's policies. So why do we like Donald Trump when some might say in any other world this wouldn't be a bloke you'd break bread with? What is the big attraction? I think we can name the obvious ones. Does it go deeper than that? Also this afternoon, more than 8,000 social media accounts, including ones with video testimonials from people smuggled into the UK, were shut down last year for promoting the crime. We'll have more on that story shortly. And more than half of Gen Z, people aged between 13 and 27, are said to be in favour of turning the UK into a dictatorship. We got Soy Boy Finn working on our show. He's 23. He's right. He loves a dictatorship, as our Finn. He's even got a Kim Jong-un backpack. I mean, I'm telling you, that's how bad it is. Never see him out of the colour red. Details on the way. We'll have more of that and more from you. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. Now, before the news, we played The Voice of Doom, day 13. This was the voice we've been playing with you.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Or playing for you. These are some of the wrong answers. Laura Trott, it is not. Angela Eagle, no. Lisa Nandy, no. Bridget Phillipson, no. I think all of those names have come up every day since we've done this. Maggie Oliver, it is not. Lucy Powell, it is not. Rachel Reeves, it is not. Lizzie Collinge. I don't know who Lizzie Collinge is. Do we have any idea who Ms. Collinge might be? She's a Labour MP. It ain't Lizzie Collinge. And we still haven't got a right answer. There you go. Still have it. Maybe tomorrow we'll drop a clue in. Have a listen to the voice again to ponder on.
Give me hundreds of examples.
If you've got any idea, then we're all ears at this end. 3:05. Now, social media accounts featuring video testimonials from people smuggled into the UK were among more than 8,000 shut down last year for promoting the crime. Other accounts removed by the National Crime Agency in 2024, including one offering prizes to migrants who referred a friend to illegal services. The National Crime Agency saw a 40% increase in the number of accounts taken down from platforms like Facebook, X, YouTube and TikTok compared to the figures for 2023. Let's speak to Stephen Wolfe, friend of the show, former MEP and director of the Centre for Migration and Prosperity. Stephen, good afternoon to you. I mean, you could say, you know, trebles all round for taking these kind of videos down, right? I mean, that's a good thing, but clearly there's still enough material out there to entice.
Good afternoon, Ian. Yes, look, let's be positive when we should be positive with both the government and our police forces who are able to work with the social media companies to bring these down. But what it does show is two things. First of all, is the power of the people smugglers and their reach and their capabilities of using social media as a great marketing tool. And secondly, that they're still a force to be reckoned with. And as we published research over the weekend, which I know is talking with your team, already they've made around £7 million this year with the 1,098 that they've managed to smuggle across the channels. So when they're earning so much money, just £7 million in 3 weeks, this is nothing. It's a drop in the ocean for them.
Yeah, absolutely. This would be, you know, once in a while you see a big drug bust, don't you? And, you know, you think, oh, that's got to surely be 17 tons of Peruvian marching powder nabbed at Dover docks. Surely there's never going to be a drug trade again. Doesn't touch the sides.
No, and unfortunately not. I mean, we're looking at these pretty big numbers. And, you know, I've had a number of discussions with various parties over the weekend about how we are managing to deal with this, bearing in mind the success that Donald Trump has had. I mean, I'm sure you've been well up on what he was doing in relation to Colombia.
Yeah, we've been talking about that. It was extraordinary, very simple move.
Absolutely. And should we do that with France? Should we say that we will close down Calais? We will not allow any more imports into the United Kingdom coming across the Eurostar. If we do that, would that actually make the French finally listen and get their people, who we actually are paying for, the tune of £500 million in the past 10 years, £500 million that we've given the French? Would that be something that could successfully work to encourage them to actually do the job that we require them to do, which is stop people leaving the Calais borders?
And the stopping people leaving from Calais borders has continued with pace since Mr. Starmer took the big job. I know we've talked about this before, Stephen. You know, him and Yvette Cooper keep wanging on about smashing the gangs while hardly getting to the coalface of the problem, which is stopping the boats.
Absolutely. I mean, they came up with some really good phrases and good intentions, as did Rishi Sunak. Stop the boats, stop the gangs. We've heard the language before. But the reality is what most people are looking at. And when they see Donald Trump achieving this within the first week or few days of him coming into power, is asking the question, why can't you do exactly the same? Here we are going through the same rigmarole of saying that we can work with our European colleagues and Europol and the services there to stop them coming into Europe in the first place. No, it's not. The key answer now to a lot of Europe's issues is turning to those countries on its borders and saying, well, we can see what Donald Trump has done. We will stop giving you the money. Over 100 billion euros has been sent to African countries in the past 10 years from the European Union, and yet you still see huge numbers coming up the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean and the Western Mediterranean routes into Europe.
What would happen, hypothetically, if Keir Starmer got a load of boats and maybe a load of planes and kind of sort of, right, I'm going to do a bit of a Colombia thing here. All of those people that have crossed the channel this week, and maybe those from the last 7 months, they know mostly that there are hotels where many of these people are, and they said, really sorry guys, you gave it a go, this isn't the way to do it. Everybody's on a plane or a boat, they return to France, and end of. What would literally happen if he did that?
Well, I think the NHS will be overwhelmed with the number of people who are having heart attacks, to be honest, Ian.
That's true.
Yeah, we don't see that. But I think what it would do is it would actually cause a massive European political issue, because the French just wouldn't accept it, nor would the European Union. Yeah. But maybe it's something like that. And I've been arguing this for some time. It's something needs to change. Something needs to change in the psyche of our civil servants. We need to look at the Foreign Office, who have always tried to protect this kind of international calamity, as they would see it, if we disagreed so vehemently with the French. Perhaps it is something like that would actually finally get people to think around the table. But I'm also intrigued by the way that Donald Trump kind of addressed Davos, which obviously, as we know, Keir Starmer loves Davos more than Parliament.
Yeah.
Recently saw that particular clip, shocking as it is. But when he was there, you started to see some of the huge businesses, the major conglomerates, starting to talk differently about the language across a whole spectrum of things, and immigration was one of those. So perhaps Europe can finally start to see they've got an opening here, an opportunity to change tact.
Well, but will they, of course? Will they move from that kind of groupthink speak of Western leaders where they all appear to parrot a very kind of similar line from a pre-prepared press release, Stephen? It's that kind of Trudeau, Macron, Sunak-y, Starmer type way of running things that they seem absolutely wedded to for some extraordinary reason.
Well, they do seem wedded to it for two particular reasons. One is that I think when we saw Angela Merkel, she was heavily backed by Bertelsmann and the huge newspaper and media power that's in Germany, on the argument that we needed to have people coming into Germany to fill the businesses. And the second big argument is those by the economists that run the European Central Bank, and we see it here in the Treasury, is that they believe that we have displacement of population, that we're not producing enough children, our population is declining, and therefore you need to import thousands more from abroad to be able to fill the jobs. Those are the two huge drivers that go behind the concept of GDP growth. And no one seems to contemplate that in a growing world where you'll see more mechanization, more technology through AI, that is not necessarily the way forward. You need to look at production and productivity rather than just bringing in low-skilled wages.
There it is. Stephen, thank you. Stephen Wolfe, as ever, talking some common sense, former MEP Director of the Centre for Migration and Prosperity. Thank you to him. Some of those guesses, by the way, on the Voice of Doom keep coming through. It's not Emily Thornberry, Layla, nor is it Angela Rayner. Kirsten, that comes up quite a lot. Kaz, it's not Suella Braverman. And Janet says, sorry, but this mystery voice is getting really boring. Yeah, you're telling me, right? I have to play it every flipping day. Well, I don't actually play it at all. Amy, who doesn't do too much around these places, presses a button. She comes all the way in from the Midlands every day just to play the mystery voice. We might get a winner tomorrow. Who knows? Torrin says, Marjorie Taylor Greene to be our next sexy dictator and run the country for Big Don. Anne Cryer is the voice of doom. No, it's not. You forget that before it became normie fashion to hate Trump, he was a national treasure in the States, says Justina. True, that's the weirdest thing about Trump. Well, before they knew quite a lot about his backstory, I suppose. You know, he appeared in Home Alone. We were watching Home Alone a couple of months ago, and my little boy went, it's Donald Trump there, because he has that little cameo in his own hotel. And when he did the Apprentice, the bit that got him, of course, was the coming out of the coach saying that women like to be grabbed by the... And you know what he said afterwards. That was before the 2016 election. Now, in any other world, that would be the end of your campaign. It was such a kind of graphic thing to say. And it's amazing how I hear people go, no, he didn't actually say that. Didn't actually say that. He didn't say he does that. Well, dress it up whatever way you like. You know what he said. That would normally sink somebody, but that would be end of story. But it wasn't stateside, and Donald Trump continued, and you know there are other women and other allegations about his business dealings, but that's the reason really for the question. Why do we like Donald Trump? Because in any other world, I don't think if he was your boss you'd have a great time. I don't think if you worked for him, certainly closely, you'd have a great time. I think this is a man that would demean and shout and wouldn't be very pleasant. People would always say, and I hear this in my industry, people go, yeah, but all they wanted was the job done right. So it doesn't matter how loud you shout or how mean or, you know, unpleasant you might be, because actually your motive wasn't personal. You just wanted the job done right. And I hear that said a lot. So in the world of media, I've lost count of how many. I mean, I could write several front pages of tabloid newspapers of the people that are the worst kind of human you'd ever want to work with. But the defence is always, but they just wanted the job done right. So they weren't, you know, it wasn't like they weren't bullies. They just wanted the job done right. It was always that. So Donald Trump has all of that in his backstory, but he's still loved. And I think that's a genuinely interesting question as to if it was any other one in any other world, you might have a different view. But Trump has managed to somehow usurp his own, you might say to be generous, questionable backstory. Let's be generous about it, and we can argue over specifics. And he's managed to go above that. Is that just about how he sounds? Is that just about how he compels, how mesmeric he is? Is that all it is? Is it something more than that? I mean, the actions in the last couple of days have been amazing from Donald Trump. I mean, the Colombia thing, I'm in awe of that. I think, man, look, he just did that. That's exactly what you want a leader to do. And I know, as was previously pointed out, I think it was Ralph in Liverpool that made the point, you know, the position of the President of the United States gives you a very different take or ability than our Prime Minister could have. It's not quite the same thing, but nonetheless, you know, full house points all round for the Colombian thing. This will be Roger in Daventry on the issue of immigration. What's your points, Roger? Good afternoon.
Right, good afternoon, Ian. It's just now regarding immigration, no one ever talks about population density.
Yep.
And England certainly is one of the most densely populated countries in Europe. And when it comes to saying we should take our fair share, we'll base it on a density basis, then France has got to take a hell of a lot more because they are 3 times the size of us.
Well, I mean, they do take more, of course, as do Germany and others, but they absolutely should do, right?
Yes. Yeah. That is my point. And also, we are full. We are absolutely full. And no one actually mentions the pollution and the filth that we're putting on this planet. And it's, well, not on the planet, in this country and the planet.
When you say pollution and filth, I mean, that's quite harsh, isn't it? If somebody who has escaped a war.
Do you ever drive down a road and see the filth on the side of the roads?
Okay, but I don't know whether, you know, that's all down to immigrants.
Well, no, I'm not saying it is, but it's just down to...
If you ever grew up in Ashford in the 1970s, you'd know what I'm talking about.
I know, but it's down to an increased population, isn't it?
Well, of course, we have an increased population, no doubt about it. Absolutely right. I'm glad you clarified that last point as well. Roger, thank you very much indeed for that. The country's dependency is showing population densities. You know what's at the top of the list? Apparently China. China's absolutely massive. But I guess it depends on how you define population density. Is that only defined if you take into account habitable cities or towns, rather than entire landmass, which might be 80% forest or something like that? I'm thinking aloud here. This comes from Andrew. As an American immigrant living in England, I cannot fathom why the English stick their noses in American politics so deeply. Most Americans don't even know what a prime minister is, let alone who's doing the job. Makes the English seem pathetic with all their sucking up and begging for a local Trump. Well, I'd have thought, Andrew, would you not congratulate the fact that people in another country know more about your country than you do? Would that not be a good thing, that you take interest in the greatest superpower on the planet and a country that we have a relationship with and a country that has a direct effect for us on what it does and decides in so many areas of policy? Would that not be a good thing, that you'd have an opinion on that? Tim in Southampton says, if Donald Trump gets another state visit, it'll be interesting to see if the left is protest in the same numbers. If Sadiq Khan allows blimps to be flown, I forgot about that. And if Trump is allowed to address Parliament this time, hypocrisy. I mean, remember the last time he came here? People were protesting, seriously, like we'd invited Putin or Kim Jong-un to the thing. What? Trump? Yeah, he's the American president. Not the president of North Korea, not the president of Mogadishu or some other godforsaken land somewhere. It's not the head of ISIS coming. It's Donald Trump, mate. Donald flipping Trump. You might not like him. It's Donald Trump. Have a day off. Behave yourself. The world lost its mind, and the mayor of London said, yeah, you can fly a big blimp across the sky saying Trump go home or whatever the hell it said. I think it was a sort of a naked Trump sort of caricature thing, which was all quite juvenile stuff. Extraordinary. Martin says, I like Donald Trump. I think he's brilliant. I thought it the first time around. I don't live in America, but I do think Trump tells the truth. He's very open. I really hope he gets all of his policies done. At least he's got a vision, a bit like Starmer. He has a vision since he got his new spectacles. Brittany says, as an American, I'm 100% Trump, and I hope that the UK can get anyone else better than Starmer. A puppy, any breed, would be better than Starmer. Love your show, Brittany. Thank you very much indeed for that. What's interesting about Trump, and this is why I mentioned earlier, somebody told me last week that Joe Biden issued more licenses to drill for oil in his term as president than Donald Trump did in his term for president. The other one we regularly hear is that Obama, previous to Trump, deported more illegals than Donald Trump did when he was president. Now, if both of those things are true, you would never know that from the mood music, which is why the question of why do we like Donald Trump isn't about what he says or how he says it, because that's a big factor. And we go back to the Maya Angelou thing about it's the feeling you leave people with rather than what you... People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you meant, but they will never forget the feeling that you gave them. So Joe Biden couldn't give a feeling to anything, anywhere. Barack Obama was a very sophisticated, I mean that in the real sense of the word, suave, smooth operator, but didn't speak loud. You know, Donald Trump speaks loud. I mean business, common sense, bang, tell it like it is. No messing around, no monkey business here. We're going to get right on with it. He's that guy. But if the truth betrays the image, if you like, if that is true, then where does that leave us with this? When it comes to Trump, is it like the Boris Johnson kind of loving that everybody had turned out to be a big old phony? I don't sense that with Trump, by the way. I don't think that is necessarily the case, but it's a question we must ask, bearing in mind he's the leader of the free world. 0344 499 1000.
She said, we need some Trump-style optimism. We need to be more positive. We need to, we need to be a bit more radical in our pursuit of growth. Well, yeah, let's have a look at what Trump's done. He's got rid of the electric car targets. He's tearing up working from home mandates. He's, look how he's dealt with Colombia overnight. Imagine if we did that with the French over the boats. Said, look, if you don't sort the boats out in the next week, we're on. Right. Obviously, I'm not suggesting we do that to that extreme level, but it's one thing saying, we need to be more like Trump, but just, look at what he's doing rather than what he said.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Collins, where did you get that old nonsense that China is the most densely populated country in the world? No, somebody messaged to say that was the case. Somebody else has messaged to say that the United Kingdom is 8th in Europe for population density, but top of the list is Monaco, which is kind of a country within a country, as it were. Vatican City as well. Malta, Netherlands, and Belgium are the only the European part of Turkey as well are the only countries that have a more densely populated countries than United Kingdom, and behind that, the next big country would be Germany. Which is not dissimilar to the UK, and Italy on that list as well. France is half what the UK is in terms of population density. This one from Peter says, the reason Trump deported less than Obama or Biden is simple. It's because a lot less got in. Remember the wall and all the extra border force, says Peter. Yeah, that could be true, although many of the people that are deported have been there a number of years, you know, trying to... There is an uncomfortable fact for any American president, and that is whatever they say about immigration. And remember, even Biden tried to pretend he was strict on immigration, deporting more people than anyone else, blah, blah, blah. Every president deports like 3 million a year or something, and has done for decades. That's always been the case. No matter who you are, you're always going to deport X amount. But that's a good point from Peter. Nick says, Britain is horrifically overcrowded. The government should make it clear that we will not take any asylum seekers at all because Britain is full. They should all stay in France where they are safe. As for the argument that we need to take our fair share, France needs to take 18 million refugees before they reach our current level of population density. 18 million? Really? That's double the population, over double the population of their country. But maybe that is true. I don't know, Nick. Nick's done the stats, perhaps. This will be Chris in Epsom. What have you got for us, Chris? Hello.
Hi, Ian. Well, there's three things that we need to deal with.
Yeah.
That's immigration,
yep,
power, and food. And they all contain the same word, security.
Yes.
Now, I've lived and worked in Abu Dhabi.
Okay.
In the oil and gas industry.
Yep.
Now, the oil companies don't tell you the deals that they get out there, but I can tell you the deals that they get. They get 16%. They pay for all the exploration, and what they pull out the ground, they get 16% of. That's it. Now, if anybody had any business nous, they would turn to the oil and gas companies here, right? Because they say, oh, if we let them drill, they just sell it on the open market. No, you give them a restricted license, but everything they pull out the ground, they get 20% of, but they sell it to us. Okay. They get 20% profit. All right, that would lower the power costs in this country incredibly. We'd be on a line with America because our electricity is 9 times the cost for manufacturing here. So we're really in problems with companies. I mean, sure. Pirelli tyres. I bought 2 new tyres for one of my motorcycles, and I got the last pair that were in the UK, and they've stopped manufacturing in the UK because of the power costs, and they've dropped back to America, and it'll be another 18 months before they supply the UK. Now, food security. We need to stop that inheritance tax. It's ridiculous. All we need to do is to create an inheritance tax that only affects farms or land that hasn't already been passed down 2 generations. Call them generational farms, right? And they make them exempt, unless, of course, they sell the whole thing, and then they pay. Yeah. That way, the small farmers would still be going, as everybody's discussed and everybody knows, they are land rich and cash poor. All right, and that is the problem, and it can be overcome by having that type of system put in place. Then we look at immigration. Now, if we've taken control of our power, all right, because let's be fair, all right, there are a growing number of scientists now that say that human carbon emission, is not creating global warming. You've got the regreening of the Sahara and the Saudi Arabian deserts because they're getting more rain now. Yeah. And because of the carbon's gone up, because carbon was 240 parts per million. All right, it's now 400 parts per million. 150 parts per million, plants die. Farmers put carbon generators in their greenhouses to take it up to between 1,200 and 1,500 parts per million. All right, because that's the optimal level for plant growth. So if we did that with the oil and gas, all right, because we're not making a jot of difference to global. All we're doing is exporting it. But we can't deal with the immigration if we haven't got power security, because we get so much nuclear power from France. All right, wind power and solar power is never going to cut it. Ed Miliband's a bloody nutcase. I mean, they cost an absolute fortune. They're being subsidised by the taxpayer. They're being built in China by with coal-fired power stations, producing the power to produce the solar panels, and the windmills. Then, if we've got our power and we've got our food, which I'm old enough to remember when I was taught in school, we had power and food security. All right, that was just before the last Labour lot crashed it, and dear Mrs. Thatcher came in and saved us. We could turn the boat. We could just.
So we can. Yeah, there is. Listen, what you're talking there, Chris, is you're making the classic error of speaking common sense, and it deflates or deflects rather, and somewhat deflates, but it deflects from Ed Miliband's evangelical sermon. The Archbishop of Bollards, as he has now been named on this show, won't have any of that, because he'll give you some other stats that counter it and say, no, but going forward and the bigger picture, and, you know, we've got to be leading the way, and it's the green industry and there's going to be a gazillion jobs and all the rest of it. Chris, you make a very powerful point. You want to take issue with what Chris said? I'm all ears at this end. He was a great call. 0344 499 1000. A lot of great calls coming in here. Best calls on the planet. This one in from Len, born in 1952. He says in brackets, I'm sure there's a reason for that. He says, great show. Trump is here. Best news in years. Hope he invades and saves Canada as 51st state and the UK as the 52nd state of America. The UK needs a strong leader, says Len in North Wales. It certainly needs one of those, and we ain't had one for yonks, for God's sake. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk about that worrying survey of Gen Z in just a moment, who quite like the idea of living in a dictatorship. Not a democracy, dictatorship. Connor Tomlinson, commentator and host of the Lotus Eaters podcast, is going to be with us in just a moment. Stand by for that. Coming next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 25 to 4 on Talk. Here's an absolute beauty. A new study reveals that most young people in the UK support turning the country into what? If that was the family fortunes, what would the top answer be? It certainly wouldn't be this. They support the idea of turning the country into a dictatorship. The findings are part of a Channel 4 report. Who knew? Highlights over half of those aged 13 to 27 believe the UK will be better off under a strong leader without Parliament or elections. 33% think the army should be in charge, while 47% back radical societal change through revolution. Now, we thought, who do we get to talk about this? There's only one man that can properly address this. Connor Tomlinson has been of this parish in different forms over many years now, commentator and host of the Lotus Eaters podcast, who... Are you still Gen Z?
I am. I'm 1998. Gen Z, the cut-off is 1997,
right?
Which is very symbolic because that's when our political order was completely upended by Tony Blair.
Good point.
Yes, and I think that's actually the reason why this polling has been quite consistent. So there was a 2022 Onward study called The Kids Aren't All Right that registered support of, I think it was 61% were sympathetic to a strong man taking over Parliament. Lots of people thought AI governance as well, removing the human element entirely, would be a good idea. I know, quite crazy, because, of course, who sets the algorithms? There's always people's biases as well, so there's no such thing as neutral government. And then in January, there was another study as well that registered that 21% of 18 to 45-year-olds, so it's creeping up in age brackets, spread thin, mainly concentrated among young people, would be happy with said strongman that didn't have to recognise elections. The reason, I think, is not that my generation, allow me to defend them against some of your older listeners who have the concerns of the 20th century in mind, they're not particularly enthused with uniforms and marchings and mass killings, right? Yeah. What they are enthused of is the idea that executive power can circumvent a deep state, a bureaucracy. Because as I mentioned with Tony Blair, he expanded the quangos and the committees. He outsourced pretty much all parliamentary sovereignty to these faceless, unelected bureaucrats. So we're told constantly the defenders of democracy must use undemocratic institutions and experts to govern everything. And so democracy doesn't quite work. And so what it sounds like is lots of people my age are desperate for politicians to do what they promise, and so it doesn't matter what way in which they do it, it just matters that they do it.
That they do. It's interesting you touch on that, because a slight diversion, this is why I love these conversations with somebody like yourself, because there's lots of little tentacles to it. Do you ever have that moment when there was something you saw online, you know, about a year ago or whatever, and then you can never find it again, no matter how many versions of the search you put in, you just can't find it. And there was an article written, I've never found this again, about Gordon Brown's love affair with the spreadsheet. And it brilliantly articulated that kind of new order, if you like. And I keep mentioning Macron and Trudeau and that horrendous creature that used to run New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern.
Rishi Sunak would fit into this category?
100%. Rishi Sunak never looked happier than when he was at those G7 things with those guys. He looked absolutely comfortable. And I'm not suggesting, it's a democracy, people can have their own ideas, they're not breaking the law in one respect, but it always seemed that this sort of template, Brown loved the spreadsheet. Everything sits nicely. There's a committee for that. There's an organisation for that. We've got everything, the database with everything on it. We're all interconnected. Blair can't get out of bed without talking digital ID. You know, it's all of that it's. And I don't, I'm not suggesting it's a kind of David Icke sort of conspiracy. It's just the way this kind of bizarre. I don't know where it came from. You might have a theory on this, but this idea of this sort of connected. They like the word connected order of how the world should function. Is it based on something? When we often talk about wokeism and the like, I always mention the Frankfurt School. I'm sure you're familiar with that reference. Does that type of thinking of the Blairites and the Trudeaus and all that have come since, is that linked to something?
Well, a lot of the time it's blamed on communism and socialism, but what's curious is the post-communist states that are most ripe for this kind of parasitizing of their elite class, they don't have that. Look at Hungary, they're not like us. Instead, it's the liberal societies. And it's because the liberal societies believe that everyone, no matter where they are fundamentally the same. Deep down, human nature is just identical. It's swappable, and whatever you layer on top of it, education, the economy, culture, and geography are just arbitrary. So all you need to do is take these people from here, reallocate them there, so the spreadsheet looks balanced, and everything will be fine if you just give them the right opportunities, the right laws, etc. And so this has taken hold in liberal societies, and this is where we're governed by a class of what David Goodhart calls the anywhere men. People like Keir Starmer who say they feel more at home in Davos than in Westminster. People who feel more at home in an airport lounge than their own country because they can come and go as they please. And this is why they think things like immigration don't really matter. It's why cultural concerns are always secondary to economic concerns, because everyone they meet, no matter where they're from, are just like them. They're part of the business anywhere class. Whereas 100%. Young people like me who went to school with a very diverse plurality of students, many of whom are very nice but from different backgrounds, can see that different cultures cause people to behave in different ways. And so people who are at the lower end of the economic ladder, the types that voted for Brexit, the types that are sympathetic to reform, the types in the Rust Belt who voted Trump, can see the deleterious effects of immigration on the economy, on their local area, on their culture. And so they're turning around and going, well, if all I'm getting is this, if all I'm getting is the Hobson's choice of both parties saying they're democratic, but never exacting their promise to lower migration and basically being indistinguishable, you can't get cigarette paper between them, I'll take whoever's going to come along and promise me change, no matter how they do that.
It's interesting that I touched on this earlier for the 70,000th time since it happened, when Starmer, not once but twice and probably more, talked about, you know, the right-wing bandwagon and all of that, which is sort of, I mean, that could be, you could write a dissertation on that as a student of politics, because it's so interesting what he did there. And it could have been so different, that speech. He could have said, look, anyone who's threatened to set fire to stuff and kill people, I don't know a single right-winger quote that would support somebody setting fire to a mosque or punching somebody or whatever. I don't know anybody that thinks that. So Starmer could have said, I condemn that. There's obviously a bunch of nut jobs there. However, slightly unconventionally, it has sparked a wider debate about immigration, and that's the conversation I'd like to have with you now. I think we need to get into the... He could have done that, but
he
it's
was
just
a
not...
politician.
He's not in his DNA, though, is he?
No, he's an ideologue, and nobody around him...
And Cameron wouldn't have done that either.
No, nobody around him is telling him that, because they're all of the same
100%.
class. They're all the same sort of top-down, looking at spreadsheets, managers, and so they think because they're enlightened to how we should actually be living, and that's because that's our nature, it's in all of our best interest, if only we would stop being cast under the spell of divisive populism and racism, that they can act on our behalf. And so it's actually just the far right, these divisive racists, who are setting us at odds. If you marginalise those and get rid of them, then we'll all be living in utopia, if only you just shut up and listen.
But that is so inherent in their psychology that it's not as if they have to think about saying it and go, well, we better do the bit about the right. I mean, it just comes out.
It's automatic.
That's who they are. So this report, half of 13 to 27-year-olds, I'm just out of that bracket, as you'd imagine, Connor, believe the UK would be better off under a kind of a dictatorship, as it were. I'm wondering what form they think that should take. I don't know if you've spotted this as well on social media. Mostly Americans doing this kind of reimagining of what China is actually like. Have you seen some of that?
Yes, N.S. Lyons is a very good Substack. He has a very long explanation of how the American system is already emulating the Chinese system.
Interesting.
And I think China's a great example here, because what did the Zoomers like me live under for 2 years? Lockdown, house arrest.
Yeah.
So they saw the state flexing the most amount of state power, but it was against their interest. So now they just look logically and they think, OK, so the state can intervene in all aspects of society. It's just intervening against what I would want. So why doesn't it just intervene on my behalf? So they set that precedent, and now they're worried that Zoomers are flirting with authoritarian power. Well, you guys flexed it. You showed it was there.
We never saw a greater example of authoritarian power. And of course, you know, I appreciate that at the time things might have looked different to some people. As you know, here at Talk, we were trying to have a very different conversation while, trying not to get locked up for having it.
Yes.
And all the rest of it. But that's a great example you've given there, that actually what it did say was the state can be as big as it wants to be. And OK, that was for, dodgy reasons, but it could be for good reasons. So there's a whole generation of people that have seen that.
Yes. And
saw their parents getting paid 80% of their wage for sitting at home.
If we're putting a premium on lived experience these days, again, as the left often does, OK, what's the lived experience of young men like me? And by the way, I'm more libertarian-minded on state power, at least. But I do like some of the executive power that democratically elected people like Trump, Nayib Bukele, Javier Milei have done to clean up their countries, lock up criminals and cut taxes.
Yep.
But for young, white, straight men like me, we're public enemy number one of the existing social order. So why would we want to defend that if they align themselves with democracy? And democracy means discriminating against competent, hard-working, law-abiding white men in favour of foreign criminals that they're going to battery farm at my expense. OK, why would I want that order? I'll just go with whatever the other guy is saying.
There is another, frankly, more disturbing stat that has come out today as well, Connor, and that's that nearly half of young people have stopped drinking.
I have as well.
Well, I was about to say, I reckon you're one of them. Due to health concerns, apparently the growing Muslim population, the influence of abstinence influencers. A survey of over 2,000 adults found that 43% of 18 to 34-year-olds, 32% of 35 to 54-year-olds have quit drinking, with more than half of both groups reducing their alcohol intake. Now, depends who you speak to. If I speak to Soy Boy Finn out there, who does our phones, then he he goes out on it's not what time did you get home at night, it's what time did you get home in the morning. You know, he has, 23-year-old weekends. I mean, he does it with aplomb. He's perpetually skint because he goes out on a Friday and a Saturday and gives it large and loves every bit of it. He's got great stories, and there's a big part of me that thinks, you're 20, that's what you're meant to be doing at 23. But then I speak to people like yourself who've gone, actually, I'm shunning alcohol, I'm not drinking at all. So what is it then? I'm getting both pictures here.
There's multiple reasons here. So there is very much a culture of wellness and self-improvement online. My friend Chris Williamson, for example, former Love Island contestant, now is one of the biggest podcasts in the world. Yep. He talks about health and fitness, and he's gone selectively sober over time just to improve his fitness goals and his ability to be productive. And frankly, you need all the productivity you can get in this economy, because not only is alcohol expensive, but everything's expensive. True. So if you're a young guy, you're really interested in making money, you really want to get your mortgage, you got to wrap it up. And that's the other important point that you said about the Muslim population. That's growing. The average age, I think, in this country among Muslims is 27, where the average age of the overall population is about 40. And so I wonder how much that demographic as well has an influence on the I'm against democracy polling, because I would be interested to see, per the Henry Jackson polling, how many of those are also not enthused about democracy.
So you not drinking is because you have a clearer head. Is it as simple as that?
Yes, and it's really expensive. And also, one other thing as well, in that poll that they showed, the Channel 4 poll, it showed that the level of religious worship is going up. Yes, that's among the Muslim population, but if you look over in America, everyone I know working in Washington, D.C., it's anecdotal, I understand, is a young Catholic guy that is going to traditional churches. They're getting married younger. Why would you go out and drink? Okay, it's usually because, especially in your generation, Ian, you'd go out, you'd chat to girls at bars, you'd flirt, you'd hope to find someone. If they're getting married younger, then what's the need to go out and socialise in pubs? And finally, it's just the internet. I mean, if you're going to stay at home, reading books, watching Netflix, etc., why do you need to go out and drink?
Well, there is a great, which comes down to the kind of, it sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory, you talk about lockdown, but suddenly within that time, we upped Deliveroo, we allowed people to get their own entertainment at home with a, 25,000-inch TV in your room, Netflix was delivering you everything you wanted to. It's almost like a 15-minute city idea.
Bread and circuses.
There it is, you see. Yeah, perfect. Listen, Connor, great to see you.
Pleasure as always.
We will see you again. Connor Tomlinson with us. He is, of course, commentator, host of the Lotus Eaters podcast. If you haven't checked it out, do so. It's a download. It's there to listen to. And there's loads of, I don't know how many episodes now. Probably thousands now, by now. That's Connor with us here on Talk.
Government getting tough, you can't buy a knife unless you're 18, right? What about prevent?
What about the fact this guy was referred 3 times to prevent? What about the fact he was found 10 times at school carrying a knife? What about the absolute failures of all the authorities, child services, prevent, the local police? What about those failures? And then they suppressed the truth for as long as they possibly could. And in fact, because of the guilty plea, there's a lot more would have come out in the court case, but that's by the by, perhaps for now. Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is just gone 10 to 4 on Talk. Lots to get through here. Is that the email you've just sent me, Finn? All right, OK. Well, do I read that out now, or shall I come to it at another point? OK, we'll leave it. It's an interesting email we got about something we covered previously. We'll come to that. More comment from you. Jeremy Carl's here at 4, by the way. We'll chat to Jezza in the next few moments to find out more about what is going on. Let's do, finally, some messages from you. Gary in Chesterfield says, Trump's term ends in 4 years. When we are due a general election, why doesn't Trump then join Farage and become Prime Minister? No law to say the PM has to be born in the UK. Boris was born in the USA. Indeed. In fact, Trump can argue, because his mother was Scottish, his grandmother, I think, was from Liverpool, I think I'm right in saying. So he could probably make a claim on that one. Get the British passport through Keir Starmer's open borders policy and go, yeah, I want to join, and then become the Prime Minister. He could do. It's going to be, the next 4 years are going to be absolutely pivotal in this country. Make no mistake, the Trump administration will come across some hurdles along the way. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Elon Musk's endeavours work out. You can almost see, and I'm not the first to say this, that there could easily be an almighty row and Musk no longer talks to Donald Trump and off he goes. And is it at odds with Elon Musk makes electric cars? Where does that sit in Trump's kind of, we're not so struck on the green stuff policy? Elon Musk, I think, also is behind a big solar panel, multi-gazillion-dollar business as well. Where does that sit in Elon Musk's thing? If Trump does for the next 4 years what he's done in the first 4 days, then his vice president will become the president. There'll be no doubt about that. He'll be very attractive to voters. He's younger, he's bright, he knows his terrain, etc. But it will also send a massive firework up the trouser leg of British politics, and will absolutely, if the mood music is sufficient and the successes demonstrably outweigh, call them failures or whatever you want, in the Trump administration, then Reform UK, I don't want to be overconfident and say home and dry, because to win an election from a position of having just 5 MPs would be extraordinary, although they came second, very tight in some areas. Big difference between coming first and second in a general election. I'm talking about in constituencies. That would be, but if they came back with, like, I don't know, 120 seats, and the Tories came back with 50 seats, then politics, if it hasn't changed for good already, will absolutely have changed, because there will be nothing for the Conservatives to get into, certainly not inside several generations. But I do think that story is dependent on a lot of things. It's dependent on Reform UK. I don't want to use the term squeaky clean, but it kind of is a bit of that. If anything starts to go really wrong, look, this was like the Tories, when stuff started to go wrong for the Tories, people spotted it, they sniffed it and thought, no, not. So as long as Reform keep their nose clean and Trump does really well, and our economy is just about ticking along, then reform could do really well. If our economy explodes into an amazing mass of success stories, then it's in a very different place. Because that would probably keep Keir Starmer where he is. This one comes in from No Name Given. Yes, a dictatorship, but what kind of dictatorship? Left-wing or right-wing? Good point. This one from Peter in Pontefract, who says the reason Trump deported... Oh, I think I did read this one. The reason Trump deported less than Obama or Biden is simple. It's because a lot less got in. Remember the wall and the extra border force. Yeah, but it never stopped.
Oh, God.
It never stopped, did it, Jeremy Carr?
No, sorry.
Nothing ever stopped.
My thing. What?
Drop your thing.
How are you?
I'm good.
I'm traumatised.
Traumatised? What happened?
I'll tell you off air. I can't tell you. Even I can't tell you on air. A terrible, terrible thing happened to me.
Can't wait.
How are you?
Fine.
What's the story? I don't want to talk about it. I will do probably. So what's the? Tell me what's galvanised, because I tuned into Michael Graham this morning on Morning Glory, and he was saying, and this is brilliant, that he believes that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are morphing into each other, and you have people phone up doing impressions of how Richard III has indeed become Sir Keir Starmer. She does look like Richard III. Do you know that?
She does look like Richard III, doesn't she? She also looks like Ed Miliband's sister.
Who's employed a high-class photographer on the British taxpayer to make himself look better. Do you know that story?
No, say
You
again.
must know this. You must know
Who's
this. The band hires tax-funded photographer, despite previously criticising politicians who did the same. The Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, run by the former Labour, is advising for a photographer to produce images that grab headlines and make our boss stand out on social media.
What about that?
Yes, the man who couldn't eat a bacon sandwich without a luck in it.
Couldn't eat a bacon. I'm glad you're here, by the way, because
Why?
you don't never know. We've been missing people off the schedule.
Who's missing?
Last week, who did we?
I'm here every day.
Peter Carg was here. Alex, have you seen Alex Phillips lately?
Is there a reason for you asking me that?
Yeah, because we didn't see Alex last week. We didn't see Peter Cardwell last week.
Peter Cardwell collapsed, didn't he? He was quite ill, wasn't he? It was all over the papers, wasn't it?
It was. It was in the Sun.
What happened to him?
I don't know.
Nobody did. I think it was I think it was. I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but obviously.